Chapter 588. Impudence. Mo Jingqi was furious. Following a series of coughs, his face turned red. How come Jin didn't know that the Hua family was on Li Wang's side? The empress said calmly, the Hua family isn't on any side. No matter which prince the emperor passes the throne to, there will be endless scheming. If the emperor is truly thinking for the Dechu state, then you naturally know what is best. Also, the emperor has made Li Wang regent. Now that Li Wang regent is powerful, can the Hua family really defeat Li Wang regent? In the end, the emperor still wants the Hua family to be buried with you. Mo Jingqi controlled himself and calmed his anger before saying, you and Mo Xiuyao have been close since you were young. As long as you become the Empress Dowager and beg Mo Xiuyao, he definitely won't stand by and do nothing. Naturally, he will solve Mo Jingli's problem for you. As long as you teach the sixth prince well, when he grows up, he will naturally be filial to you and treat the Hua family well. The empress couldn't help but grimace. She shook her head and sighed. After talking for so long, this is the key point. Emperor, for you to say this. I'm afraid you never understood Prince Ding, right? Qinxia once told you that the Prince Ding mansion wouldn't plot against you, but you didn't believe me. Now Qinxia is telling you that the Prince Ding mansion won't give up on revenge. I think you also don't believe me. Does the emperor think that Prince Ding hasn't made a move these past few years because he doesn't have any hatred? The hatred of killing one's father is absolutely irreconcilable. I'm afraid that even the previous regent Wang Chongsheng couldn't persuade Prince Ding. He hasn't made a move these past few years because he can endure. The more he can endure, it means, the more he hates you. Turning back to look at Mo Jingqi, the empress said, if the emperor doesn't have anything else to say, Qinxia will leave first. That's right, Lu Guifei is still outside asking for an audience. Finishing, she didn't wait for Mo Jingqi to say anything else as she turned and left. There was no sadness in his calm eyes, only a faint regret. It was a pity that after being husband and wife for more than 10 years, in the end, he still only wanted to use her. Behind him, Mo Jingqi saw from the corner of his eye that the yellow figure had left without any hesitation, a complicated look in his eyes. After a long while, he finally couldn't help but vomit a mouthful of blood. Outside the door, when they saw the empress walk out, everyone hurried forward. The empress said lightly, His Majesty is not feeling well. Consort Xian, you can go back after thanking him at the door. Concubine De and Concubine Xian only saw the emperor once or twice a year. They had long gotten used to it over the years and were not very disappointed. She listened to the empress and kowtowed a few times at the door to thank the emperor for his kindness. Then, she followed the empress back. Noble consort Lu, on the other hand, stared at the closed door for a long while before leaving in a huff. The news in the palace spread quickly outside the palace. When Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li were discussing whether to visit Great Elder Princess, Zhuo Jing came in. What's the matter? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked. Zhuo Jing said respectfully, I just received the news that Mo Jingqi released the empress, who had been grounded, and then conferred Consort Zhou as Consort De and Consort Zheng as Consort Xian. Hearing this, Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows, leaned against the chair and said leisurely, it seems that Mo Jingqi is dying. Yi Li and Zhuo Jing couldn't help but look at him. Yi Li asked, what do you mean? Mo Xiuyao said with a smile, Mo Jingqi wants to make arrangements for his funeral. Of course, he is dying. Zhuo Jing was confused, but hasn't Mo Jingqi already conferred noble consort Lu's son as the crown prince? What does the arrangements for his funeral have to do with the empress and consort Zhou and consort Zheng? Mo Xiuyao clapped his hands and said with a smile, Mo Jingqi is very suspicious and will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. How can he ignore the fight between Mo Jingli and the Lu family these days? Besides, noble consort Lu put on such a show today. Mo Jingqi will never pass the throne to the crown prince. He doesn't want to pass the throne to the crown prince or Mo Jingli. Naturally, he has to find another heir. Zhuo Jing suddenly understood and said, the sixth prince born by Zheng Xiaoyuan. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said with a smile, there's another reason. Mo Jingqi should already know that I am in the capital now. He also knows that I have a good relationship with the Empress and old Duke Hua. For the sake of old Duke Hua and the Empress, I may let go of the past and even help him solve the current problem. Yi Li asked, will you? He's thinking too beautifully. Or does he really think that I am a kind bodhisattva who does not eat mortal things? Standing, Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile, I should leave the palace to see him. If I am late, I won't be able to make it. Yi Li also stood and said, let's go together. The Li Palace also received this news. Hearing the news reported by his subordinate, Mo Jingli laughed coldly, I's imperial brother is really worrisome. In such a short time, he can create so many problems for me. Princess Xixia leaned against Mo Jingli and asked Bai Hen, what does Prince plan to do? Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said coldly, enter the palace. I want to see Muhu. Outside the bedroom, the Empress Dowager walked over with a serious expression. The guards at the door naturally did not dare to stop her. They quickly retreated to the side and respectfully invited the Empress Dowager in. When the Empress Dowager walked in, she saw Mo Jingqi unconscious on the bed. There was a pool of blood on the blanket in front of his chest. She quickly went forward and called out, Imperial son, how are you? A moment later, Mo Jingqi slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the Empress Dowager, he said with a faint smile, Muhu, you finally came. For some reason, the Empress Dowager suddenly felt guilty. She moved her eyes away and did not dare meet his gaze. Mo Jingqi did not mind and smiled faintly. It was a warmth and serenity that had never been seen before. Seeing this, the Empress Dowager felt inwardly shocked. Looking at the blood in front of Mo Jingqi, the Empress Dowager stood and angrily said, where did these dog servants run off to? Why didn't the emperor change his blanket? Forget it, Muhu. Zhen wanted some peace and quiet, so I let them go. Mo Jingqi calmly interrupted the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager was slightly embarrassed. Sitting down again, she looked at Mo Jingqi and said with heartache, Imperial son, where do you feel uncomfortable? Quickly tell Ijia. Mo Jingqi said, it's nothing. Ekhen has been waiting for Muhu. Ekhen has something to entrust to Muhu. Ekhen asks Muhu to consider Urchin's last wish and fulfill Urchin's wish. In the end, they were mother and son. Hearing these words, how could the Empress Dowager hold back? Tears were streaming down her face. Holding Mo Jingqi's hand, she said, Imperial son, if you have something to tell Ijia, just say it. Ijia will definitely do it for you. My poor imperial son. Mo Jingqi said, after Ekhen passed away, the young emperor ascended the throne. It is inevitable that things will not go smoothly. Jingli is now in a high position. He will not listen to me, his imperial brother. Even if he listens, it will be useless after Zhen passes away. I only ask Muhu to consider that the new emperor is your grandson and take care of. Before he finished speaking, the Empress Dowager had already stopped crying. Interrupting Mo Jingqi, she said, nonsense. You really want to pass the throne to the son of that slut surnamed Lu? Do you have any idea what she's done? As soon as Mo Xiaoyao returned to the capital, she ran to pay respects to the ancestors of the Prince Ding mansion. Was it something that a concubine like her could decide to pay respects to the ancestors? Whose ancestors is she paying respects to? She even invited Prince Ding to drink tea and reminisce on the streets. She has completely thrown away the face of the imperial family. This kind of woman, if emperor really passes the throne to her son, have you thought about what she will do in the future? How can she properly assist the new emperor? She will probably follow Mo Xiaoyao to curry favor with him. Emperor, you are muddle-headed. Muhu. Mo Jingqi laughed self-deprecatingly. Catching his breath, he interrupted the Empress Dowager and asked, Muhu, what do you mean? The Empress Dowager hesitated for a moment before saying, "Son, this is fate. Jingli is also a good child. He is now the regent. You also know the situation in West Hill. If things really turn out that way, won't it ruin the relationship between uncle and nephew? There would come a day when he would cause a disaster. Since it is like this, why not pass the throne to Jingli? He will definitely have descendants in the future. Even if I die, I will protect my grandchildren." "Muhu!" Mo Jingqi shouted harshly. He fiercely widened his eyes and said, "Muhu! Do you know that Zhen is like this because of Mo Jingli? Son." The Empress Dowager frowned and looked at Mo Jingqi. Of course, she knew. She also hated her youngest son for being vicious and merciless. But things had already turned out this way. She was about to lose one son. Was she going to lose another? This choice was for everyone's good. If Jingli was really forced to mobilize, then how could the newly appointed young master of the court resist? Ha! Looking at the Empress Dowager who was frowning and looking at him, Mo Jingqi suddenly laughed loudly. But that laughter was more like sobbing pain and desolation. After laughing enough, Mo Jingqi raised his head and pointed at the Empress Dowager, saying, "Muhu, you really are Zhen's good mother." Ha! Seeing her son like this, the Empress Dowager also wiped her tears. "Son, don't blame Muhu. Muhu had no choice." "What benefits did he give you?" Mo Jingqi suddenly asked. The Empress Dowager was stunned. Her face immediately became ugly. Meeting Mo Jingqi's bright eyes, everything just now was more like an ugly play. Mo Jingqi nodded and said, "Zhen understands." "Ha! What Zhen cannot have, none of you can have. Get out. Son, you, get out." Chapter 589. The Empress Dowager had been the mother of the country for over a decade and was incomparably noble. Even if Mo Jingqi had a grudge against her, he was still respectful on the surface. When had he ever been told to scram to his face like this? His face instantly became a myriad of colors. It was so complicated that it was as ugly as a palette. Imperial son. The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth. Her goal in coming here was to discuss the issue of the throne. Naturally, she could not leave so easily. Mo Jingqi did not care. He pointed at the Empress Dowager and said, "Scram out for Zhen, do you hear me? As long as Zhen is alive, Zhen is the emperor. Scram, don't even think about it, don't even think about it." The Empress Dowager suppressed her anger and stepped forward to say, "Jia knows that the emperor is not in a good mood right now. You can vent your anger, but I ask the emperor to think about the matters after his death. The emperor should think about the princes and princesses." Mo Jingqi couldn't help but laugh wildly. But he was crying and laughing at the same time. Even the corners of his eyes were bleeding. The Empress Dowager saw this and jumped in fright. She took 2 steps back. Emperor, you," Mo Jingqi said hatefully, "go tell your good son, tell him to give up on this idea. Even if the Dechu state is destroyed, Zhen will not give it to him. And that precious son of his, just wait to be buried with Zhen. If he has the ability, he can fight for the throne himself. Zhen will watch him from the heavens, die, without descendants." The last 4 words were filled with hatred. The Empress Dowager couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. The Empress Dowager did not know that Mo Jingli would never be able to have children in this life. She only thought that Mo Jingqi was cursing her with hatred. But even so, the Empress Dowager was still greatly frightened when she saw Mo Jingqi lying on the bed with tears of blood dripping from the corners of his eyes. Without any other choice, the Empress Dowager could only stumble out of the bedroom. The people guarding outside the room quickly came in to investigate. When they came in, they heard Mo Jingqi's voice, "Scram. I need some peace and quiet." Hearing Mo Jingqi's voice, which seemed to be full of energy, the guards at the door felt relieved and stood guard outside the door again. In the bedchamber, Mo Jingqi laughed bitterly. Just now, his temper had affected his heart. Once the Empress Dowager left, his originally ugly expression quickly deteriorated. Hee hee. Suddenly, a deep and pleasant laughter came from the bedroom, followed by the sound of slow and approaching footsteps. Mo Jingqi struggled to open his eyes, but the man in front of him instantly cleared his groggy mind. She widened her eyes and stared at the man standing in front of her. White robes, white hair, a handsome face, sword-like eyebrows, and an awe-inspiring aura. Her snow-white sleeves were embroidered with silver dragon patterns and auspicious clouds, and there seemed to be a faint fragrance lingering in his nose. Mo Jingqi, who had been dizzy from the smell of blood, immediately felt much more clear-headed. Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingqi said in a deep voice. Hee hee. Mo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice, Emperor, I haven't seen you for half a year and you've become like this. It really makes I very surprised. Beside Mo Xiaoyao, Yi Li, dressed in a blue robe, was holding a white jade doll in a black brocade robe. The little doll was only 5 or 6 years old. He was handsome and cute, a pair of dark eyes looking at Mo Jingqi. He had never seen such intelligence before. Seeing Mo Jingqi's blood-stained appearance, the child did not show the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he poked his head out of Yi Li's arms to see more clearly. This is your son? Mo Jingqi asked. Mo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow and took Mo Xiaobao out of Yi Li's arms, holding him in his own arms. That's right, this is my son. Mo Yuchen. Mo Xiaobao, the great name Mo Yuchen, looked at the person on the bed with some curiosity. His father had never called him by his full name. Who was this person that made him suddenly make an exception? Father. Is this the husband of that auntie in white? Mo Xiaoyao rubbed his son's little head and smiled. That's right, he is that auntie's husband, and also your sister Wuyo's father. Originally, when he heard the 3 words Mo Yuchen, Mo Jingqi's face changed. But then he heard the words auntie in white and sister Wuyo. Mo Jingqi finally sighed, closed his eyes, and swallowed back the words he wanted to say, asking, is Chang'e doing well in the northwest? Yi Li said indifferently, Wuyo has already become the disciple of the godly doctor, and plans to practice medicine to help the world in the future. Mo Jingqi was obviously a little surprised. He waved his hand with some difficulty and said, well, I know you will definitely take good care of her. Hee hee. I really didn't expect that you would actually come back to see me. Mo Jingqi looked at Mo Xiaoyao, and his eyes were unexpectedly calm. In the past, even when Mo Xiaoyao was at his lowest and Mo Jingqi was at his most high-spirited, Mo Jingqi looked at Mo Xiaoyao with vigilance and jealousy. It was the first time in his life that he had such a calm gaze as if there was nothing. Mo Xiaoyao faintly raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, I will naturally come back to see you. Otherwise, how can I explain to my father, brother, and the tens of thousands of innocent souls who died in the Prince Ding mansion? In order to catch up with the time to send you off, last year I helped you for almost half a year before I could spare the time now to come to see you off. You. Mo Jingqi was slightly taken aback. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, that's right, I already knew that you would be like this. Because back in Nanjiang, when Mo Jingli was buying medicine, I was watching from not too far away. For this matter, I even specially asked Mr. Shen to research the medicinal properties of this poison. After saying this, Mo Xiaoyao took out a small porcelain bottle and threw it onto Mo Jingqi's bed. Mo Jingqi's hands trembled as he picked up the porcelain bottle and opened it. Inside the bottle were small pills. Looking at the pills that were even smaller than soybeans in front of him, Mo Jingqi wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. He had become like this because of this poison, because of his own brother. He had been on guard against the Prince Ding mansion and Mo Xiaoyao his entire life, but in the end, he had died at the hands of his own brother. This was the biggest irony in the world. Looking at Mo Jingqi's state, Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood. Speaking of which, even if you were poisoned with this supposedly incurable poison, you still had a chance. Originally, you still had a chance to live. I remember that you originally had a Billuo flower. Am I right? Mo Jingqi's expression changed slightly, his voice hoarse. The Billuo flower was taken by you? Mo Xiuyao generously admitted, isn't that right? You should have guessed it yourself. If it wasn't for your Billuo flower, how could I have recovered completely? Mo Jingqi was silent for a long time, then suddenly burst into laughter. Haha, retribution. It's really retribution. Back then, he had caused Mo Xiuyao to be poisoned and disabled, but Mo Xiuyao had snatched his Billuo flower to cure his illness. Now that he was poisoned, he no longer had the Billuo flower to use. As expected, it was retribution. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said, whether it's retribution or not, I have no interest in knowing. But I see you like this right now, my heart is comforted. Why don't you ask if I have the antidote? You don't want to live anymore, right? As long as you're alive, every moment, every person around you will remind you how much of a failure you are. Do you know, your actions back then didn't harm the Prince Ding mansion, but completely freed the Prince Ding mansion from its hundreds of years of shackles. It's a pity, you won't be able to live for much longer, otherwise I would really want to let you see what kind of retribution you will receive for what you did to the Mahist army back then. I'll let you see, whether your so-called direct descendant of the Dechu state's royal family or my Prince Ding mansion has the right to survive in this chaotic world. Chapter 590. Don't say any more. Mo Jingqi suddenly shouted. He didn't know where his strength came from, but he reached out and grabbed Mo Xiuyao's sleeve. Kill me right now as an apology to your Prince Ding mansion. Kill me. Mo Xiuyao took a step back and easily broke free from Mo Jingqi's grip on his sleeve. He looked down at him calmly and said, I have no interest in your life right now. If you want to die, then die by yourself. However, I advise you to take it easy. Mo Jingli is still anxiously waiting right now. Mo Jingqi panted and looked at him, help me. Help me kill Mo Jingqi and the Lu family. As if he heard something strange, Mo Xiuyao asked, what benefits will I get from helping you do this? Mo Jingqi said, Zhen will order the Empress Dowager and all of the princes and princesses other than the new emperor to be buried with you. This will be used as a sacrifice to the souls of your Mahist army. Is that enough? The emperor is truly vicious and merciless. Yi Li said with a soft sigh. Mo Jingqi stared at Mo Xiuyao and asked, do you agree? Zhen can also write an edict to tell the world the truth of what happened that year. The bedroom was silent for a long time. Only then did Mo Xiuyao slowly let out a laugh. Holding Mo Xiaobao, he shook his head and said, the Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state no longer have anything to do with each other. The emperor should pray for his own good fortune. Li, let's go back. Yi Li nodded and turned to follow Mo Xiuyao. Mo Jingqi wanted to get up from the bed, but he was powerless. Mo Xiuyao's voice came from the corner of the room, although that small bottle contains poison, it can prolong your life for a few days. It's up to your majesty to decide. On the dragon bed, Mo Jingqi stared blankly at the small bottle in his hand. In the winding tunnel, Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao walked side by side. Mo Xiuyao hugged the sleepy Xiaobao and looked at Yi Li with a smile. Is Yi Li curious why I gave him the medicine? Yi Li nodded. The medicine in the small bottle was indeed what she and Mo Xiuyao had snatched from Leitingfeng. It was exactly the same medicine that Mo Jingli had bought in the southern border sacred ground. It had also been specially refined by Xinyang. Although it could not save Mo Jingqi's life, it could not be saved. But if Mo Jingqi used it, it could prolong his life for a few days. Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao both had some medical knowledge. Naturally, they could see that Mo Jingqi was like a lamp that had run out of oil and would not live past tomorrow. Mo Xiuyao said with a smile, Mo Jingqi's personality is strange, he will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. These past 2 days, he has been pushed hard by the Empress Dowager, Mo Jingli, and the Lu family. If we give him a chance to fight back, he will definitely give us a pleasant surprise. Yi Li said with a faint smile, I hope it won't be a scare. Towards people like Mo Jingqi, Yi Li had some fear. It would be better if he died cleanly. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile, you and I will just wait and see. The next morning, good news came from the palace. The emperor ordered the officials to attend morning court. Hearing this news, the officials and nobles in the imperial city were all shocked. It had to be known that the news they received was that the emperor was definitely not going to get better. While he was lying on the sickbed, Prince Li had been handling court affairs on his behalf. Suddenly, news of the emperor wanting all the officials to attend morning court had naturally shocked them greatly. The more timid ones even felt their legs turn to jelly. They wondered if the emperor had used some kind of trick to deceive them and then secretly observed their loyalty. If that was the case, they would really be at death's door. Hearing this news, Mo Jingli was also shocked and angry. His first reaction was naturally disbelief. Before giving Mo Jingqi the medicine, he had already found someone to test it. This poison was basically untreatable. Also, when Muhu went yesterday, she looked like she was about to die. This morning, she was able to attend morning court. How was this possible? At the same time, old Duke Hua and a group of old officials from the previous emperor's time also received the news of morning court. After Mo Jingqi ascended the throne, these old officials had always been wary of him. Thus, they had long tried to get them to retire or demote. Although there were not many of them left, their influence in the court was not small. This time, Mo Jingqi had also sent them to the palace. At the palace gates, the officials and nobles who met each other all had different expressions. Old Duke Hua's hair and beard were all white. He was supported by his son and grandson as he walked. Along the way, there were many officials who came up to greet him. Duke Hua. Mo Jingli was wearing the regent's embroidered robe. He looked very noble. Duke Hua squinted his old eyes and stroked his snow-white beard. He looked at Mo Jingli with a smile and said, so it's Li Wang. I haven't seen Li Wang for a few years. Your Highness Li Wang has become more dignified. Us old fellows are really old. Duke Hua had been recuperating at home for the past few years and did not like to go out. Counting the years, he had not seen Mo Jingli for 4 or 5 years. Although he was now in a high position, Mo Jingli did not want to offend Duke Hua. He cupped his hands and smiled, Old Duke, you must be joking. My insignificant abilities are not worthy of your attention. Duke Hua looked at Mo Jingli with a smile and said, Your Highness Li Wang is becoming more and more eloquent. Mo Jingli accompanied Duke Hua to the Qinzheng Hall for the morning court. They chatted as they walked. Prince Ding has returned to the capital in 2 days. I wonder if old Duke has seen him. Duke Hua shook his head and said, I'm old. It's inevitable that I'm not up to date with news. I have to thank Prince Ding for informing me of Prince Ding's return. If Prince Ding still remembers that I have some relations with the Prince Ding mansion, I'm sure we'll be able to meet in a few days. Now that Prince Ding has just returned to the capital, he must have a lot of things to do. Let's not disturb him. Mo Jingli smiled faintly and said, Old Duke, you're right on time. Today, the Emperor summoned Old Duke to the palace. Duke Hua smiled and said, It must be because the Emperor's body has recovered. He's so happy that he wants us old men to celebrate for the Emperor. Is that so? Mo Jingli did not refute. He looked at Duke Hua apologetically and said, Old Duke, Duke Hua did not make things difficult for him. He smiled and said, Your Highness Li is a young man. He won't be able to walk with us old men. Your Highness Li will go first. Mo Jingli cupped his hands and smiled, If that's the case, Old Duke, take care. I will take my leave first. I won't send you off. Duke Hua smiled. Seeing Mo Jingli walk away with majestic steps, the smile on Duke Hua's face gradually faded. His son, who was supporting him, said worriedly, "Father, the emperor hasn't summoned us to the palace for a few years. This time, I'm afraid it won't be simple." Duke Hua sighed helplessly and said, "If the emperor wants his subjects to die, they have no choice but to die. Moreover, he only summoned us to the palace. It's not like we're the only family. Forget it. When you reach the palace, remember, the less you say, the less you make mistakes. It's not bad if you don't say anything. If there's anything, this old man can still block it for you. Father, it's all because I'm useless." The eldest son of the Hua family was already over 50 years old. He supported Duke Hua and said with a face full of shame, "If it wasn't for the incompetence of their descendants, why would their father, who was almost 80 years old, have to personally come to the palace to block the schemes of the emperor for them?" Duke Hua waved his hand and said, "I don't know how many more days I can protect you. I'll count on it as long as I can. I'm thinking that today's matter might have something to do with Prince Ding." "What do you mean?" The eldest son of the Hua family was shocked. He did not dare to show it on his face. He could only lower his voice and ask. Duke Hua said, "I just heard from King Li that Prince Ding came back in 2 days. As soon as Prince Ding came back, His Majesty recovered. Do you think this is a coincidence? But, with Prince Ding's temper, he would never save His Majesty." They had all watched Prince Ding grow up. Even if they had not seen each other for many years, their basic temperament would not change. Prince Ding was not a refined and generous person when he was young. After more than 10 years, it was impossible for him to develop a temperament that repaid evil with good. Duke Hua sighed and said, "I'm just afraid that His Majesty's days are numbered." "Father, you're saying that His Majesty summoned us to the palace to entrust his children to him?" Duke Hua waved his hand and said, "Let's go. We'll know when we see." Today, the Hall of Diligent Government was full. There were many more people than usual for the morning court. Many young courtiers found that there were several old courtiers that they did not even know standing in front of them. There was also the prince of the imperial family. They all faintly knew that something big was going to happen today. The timid ones couldn't help but shrink in the back, not daring to say a word. Those who stood in the front were whispering to each other, exchanging their opinions. It could be seen from the positions that these courtiers had been divided into 2 groups. One group surrounded Mo Jingli, and the other group surrounded Prime Minister Liu. They all looked at each other with hostility. The other group was independent of these people. However, there were only a few of them. They were all old men over 60 years old, and those who did not have much power. "His Majesty is here." A eunuch's sharp voice sounded in the hall. The hall suddenly fell into silence. Everyone couldn't help but look at the empty dragon chair. After a while, a series of footsteps came from the back of the hall. Mo Jingqi, who hadn't been seen for a long time, walked out with the help of a eunuch. Because he had been sick for a long time, Mo Jingqi was so sick that he was emaciated. The dragon robe on his body could no longer hold him up, making him look weirdly out of place. His face was still sallow, but his lips were a striking dark red, and his eyes were astonishingly bright and sharp. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Long live Your Majesty." Mo Jingqi looked down at those courtiers and said calmly, "Greetings, my dear courtiers. Come, announce the imperial edict." Chapter 591. The courtiers in the hall couldn't help but look at each other. Announcing the edict without saying anything as soon as the court started, this meant that the emperor didn't plan on discussing anything with them, he just wanted them to listen. After being stunned for a moment, someone quickly reacted. "This subject respectfully listens to the imperial edict." Since someone had already responded, no one else could say anything else. The courtiers in the hall all knelt down and respectfully said, "We respectfully listens to the emperor's imperial edict." The head eunuch beside Mo Jingqi, who was announcing the edict, unfolded, his hands couldn't help but tremble. The words he was about to say paused. Before he could react, Mo Jingqi's cold gaze had already landed on him from the dragon throne. That eunuch's heart quivered, and he hurriedly read it out loud. By the will of the heavens, the emperor decrees, Zhen, with great virtue, has inherited Pai Ji for 19 years. Ever since I took over the reins of power, words have been obscured, flattering, monopolizing power, corrupt officials have succeeded. Zhen has listened to slanderous words, placing the king's mansion in a dangerous place, wrongly harming loyal people. Behind the scenes, in front of Wu Yan and my ancestors. The eunuch who announced the edict read it out in a carefree manner. Even the people who were listening to the edict all changed their expressions. What imperial edict? This is clearly an edict of self-guilt. And what monopolizing power? Corrupt officials have succeeded. If it's really monopolizing power, corrupt officials have succeeded, then what are the people in the hall? When they heard the Prince Ding mansion incident being mentioned, everyone couldn't help but gasp. The emperor actually personally admitted that the Prince Ding mansion incident that year was related to him, and even issued an edict of self-guilt to admit his mistakes. Although this incident had already been known to the world a few years ago, the common people had already discussed it. But discussion is discussion, the emperor personally issuing an edict to admit it is another matter. After the eunuch finished reading the edict, everyone let out a long sigh, and then quickly held their breaths. They knew that today's matter wouldn't end so easily. Mo Jingqi had been resting with his eyes closed until the eunuch finished reading the edict and asked for instructions. Only then did he raise his head and say, "Pass it down. In addition, pass down Zhen's decree. Prince Ding, Mo Xiuyao, Prince Ding, Yili, will be reinstated as the king's imperial concubine. Prince Ding's heir apparent, Mo Yuchen, will be the heir apparent of the Prince Ding, and will be given the title of Prince Xiang. Release the seal of the Prince Ding mansion, and return all the properties of the Prince Ding mansion in the capital." "Yes, your servant obeys." The eunuch's hands trembled as he held the imperial edict. Mo Jingqi thought for a moment, then said, "Let the sixth prince go and announce the decree." "Yes, your servant will take his leave." Seeing the eunuch leave with the edict, the people below finally came back to their senses. They realized that the emperor wasn't just putting on a show for the officials. He really did plan to announce his crimes to the world. Even Prince Ding's declaration of separation from the Dechu state a few years ago, and his actions of supporting the Northwest in the past few years were no longer investigated. As a result, if the people still didn't understand what the emperor wanted to do, they would have lived in vain. Imperial brother. This must not happen. Mo Jingli stepped forward and said in a clear voice. He secretly regretted that he hadn't predicted that Mo Jingqi would make such a move. He hadn't taken precautions in advance. At this time, in front of all the civil and military officials, without Mo Jingqi's consent, even if he was the regent, he didn't have the right to ask people to take back the imperial edict. Mo Jingqi looked down at him from above, slightly raising an eyebrow, "And? Why not?" Mo Jingli said, "Once this edict is announced, it will greatly damage the reputation of the Dechu state's imperial family. How will the people of the world view the imperial family, and how will they view the emperor? Imperial brother, please reconsider." Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed with a carefree smile, saying, "No need to reconsider. Zhen has issued the edict, so the fault is naturally Zhen's. It has nothing to do with the imperial family or the future imperial heir. Besides, I don't have many days left to live. Presumably, the people of the world will see Zhen's determination to regret and remorse." But Mo Jingli's heart was unwilling, and he wanted to say more. Mo Jingqi waved his hand, saying, "There are no buts. What happened in the past was Zhen's fault. Now, Zhen only hopes that Prince Ding will see that Zhen doesn't have much time left to support Zhen's heir and stabilize the foundation of the Dechu state." Once these words were said, everyone understood that the emperor had no intention of passing the throne to Prince Li. He had even pulled the Prince Ding mansion back at this time. To a large extent, it was probably to deal with Prince Li. The officials who relied on Prince Li's faction were naturally disappointed, but Prime Minister Lu was not very happy. Prime Minister Lu had been an official in court for decades. He had been a senior official for 2 dynasties. In some aspects, he was sharper than most people. Just now, the emperor had said imperial heir and not crown prince. There seemed to be no difference, but if one looked carefully, the difference was like heaven and earth. A crown prince was not necessarily an imperial heir. Even if an imperial heir was not a crown prince, he could still become the emperor. Thinking of the news that he had heard yesterday that noble consort Lu had been refused an audience with the emperor, Prime Minister Lu couldn't help but frown. Seeing the officials' different expressions, Mo Jingqi's lips curved into a faint cold smile. He said indifferently, "All right, let's not discuss this matter for now. Zhen hasn't been to court for some time. Tell Zhen about the war in the north." Even though Mo Jingqi had been ill for a long time, he could stand now, so he still had some power. Since the emperor asked them to talk about it, they had to talk about it. Therefore, the morning court lasted for more than 4 hours. When the officials whose legs were weak finally stepped out of the Qingjing Hall, the imperial edict had been out of the palace for a long time. After the morning court, Mo Jingli stepped out of the Qingjing Hall and left with a gloomy face. Prime Minister Lu, who was following behind him, also had a gloomy face. He was an old man, but he had been sitting for nearly 6 hours. Only a few retired officials were given seats by Mo Jingqi. Prime Minister Lu, who was still an official in court, had to stand even though he was old. Therefore, when he came out, he was a little shaky. The people following him hurriedly supported him. "Prime Minister, are we going back?" Prime Minister Lu pushed away the people supporting him and said in a deep voice, "Let's go and see noble consort Lu and crown prince." He had to know why the emperor changed his mind so quickly. And the sixth prince, in the inn. Because it was the end of winter, the small courtyard was still cold and bleak. The eunuch who delivered the decree was the 9-year-old sixth prince Mo Ruiyun. The eunuch who delivered the decree held the bright yellow imperial decree as he stood in the courtyard trembling with fear. In the beginning, Mo Ruiyun who stood in front of him was still somewhat respectful, but after standing for more than 15 minutes, this Prince Ding was sitting on the spacious soft couch as he hugged a black-clothed boy and teased him by the side. He did not even look at them. Mo Ruiyun, who grew up in the palace and was spoiled by Mo Jingqi to the point that she did not know the severity of the situation, gradually could not hold herself back. "Hey! Father asked me to deliver the imperial edict. How dare you not accept it?" Mo Ruiyun said. As soon as he said this, the eunuch standing behind him was so scared that his legs went soft and he sat down on the ground. He kowtowed to Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Prince, please forgive me. Prince, please forgive me." Mo Ruiyun looked back at the eunuch and snorted disdainfully. He was so timid, but he was the most capable eunuch of his father. Chapter 592. Mo Ruiyun, who had been pampered since he was young, did not know that even if his mother was here, she would also be scared to the point of kneeling and kowtowing. His reaction attracted Mo Xiaoyao's interest. Raising his head to look at him, he calmly said, "This is the person Mo Jingqi chose?" The eunuch had a bitter expression, not daring to answer. How could the sixth prince be chosen by the emperor? This was clearly a choice with no other choice. It was just that the sixth prince had been pampered by the emperor since he was young and his birth mother's status was too low to speak. He was taught by the people in the palace that even though he was already 9 years old, he was not as smart as a 4 or 5-year-old child. Mo Ruiyun proudly said, "That's right, this prince is really the sixth prince. Since you know, why haven't you come to pay your respects?" Pooh. Mo Xiaobao laid on Mo Xiaoyao's lap, his eyes wide open as he looked at this strange prince who seemed to have eyes growing on top of his head. Was he really not afraid of his father at all? Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he patted Mo Xiaobao's head. "What are you laughing at?" Mo Xiaobao blinked his large eyes. "Father is going to pay his respects to the prince?" Your father hasn't even paid his respects to the emperor, what is there to pay respects to the prince? Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Mo Xiaobao comfortably closed his eyes, lying on Mo Xiaoyao's lap to bask in the sun. That's good, I also don't want to pay my respects to the prince. If his father was going to pay his respects to the prince, then didn't that mean he would also have to pay his respects to this silly prince in front of him? It really was too shameful. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to pinch his son's small cheeks, saying, "It's easy if you don't want to pay respects. As long as you have the ability to make others pay respects to you, then you naturally don't need to pay respects to others." Mo Xiaobao disdainfully snorted, "This young master naturally has the ability." This young master? Mo Xiaoyao sneered, his hand mercilessly pinching Mo Xiaobao's little butt where Yili couldn't see. Despicable. Mother, Lord Father is bullying me. Mo Xiaoyao's grip caused Xiaobao to toss and turn in his arms. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "I just taught you this. If you don't want others to bully you, you have to rely on yourself. Before you have the ability, just obediently let father bully you. There's no future in complaining." Woo-woo. Mo Xiaobao pitifully looked at his mother who was watching the show from the side. Yili smiled and shrugged at him. She wanted to help but was unable to. Young Master Mo was very tactful and immediately said to Mo Xiaoyao with a calm face, "Lord Father, this child was wrong. Please spare me." Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and looked at Yili. "When did this kid learn to be flexible?" Yili smiled faintly. "He has always been flexible." This was the truth. Other than in front of his father, Mo Xiaobao rarely suffered because of his pride. First, he couldn't put down his face. Second, he was certain that his father wouldn't really do anything to him. Now it seemed that even the last problem of his pride was solved. Therefore, young Master Mo could be invincible in the future. Mo Ruiyun looked at the warm and harmonious scene in front of her, but her heart was very uncomfortable. The sixth prince grew up in the palace. Mo Jingqi's love for him even surpassed the crown prince and his brother, who were somewhat dull because of noble consort Lu's indifference. But even so, Mo Ruiyun didn't dare to cause trouble in front of her lord father. Looking at the 5 to 6-year-old boy in front of her who was lying in the arms of the handsome white-haired Prince Ding, Mo Ruiyun felt that something strange was spreading in her heart. Looking at the smile on Mo Xiaobao's face, she also felt that it was particularly dazzling. Mo Xiaoyao and Mo Xiaobao were playing and didn't pay attention to it. The eunuch kneeling on the ground clearly saw Mo Ruiyun's expression. He couldn't help but complain in his heart. The people in front of him weren't people that a small sixth prince like him could offend. If he angered Prince Ding, not to mention the emperor wanting Prince Ding to support him, he might even lose his little life here. The Prince Ding mansion's upbringing isn't that good? Mo Ruiyun finally didn't let down the worries of her subordinates. She stared at Mo Xiaobao and suddenly blurted out. Hearing this, the three people who were originally smiling all quieted down. Yili slightly frowned and looked at Mo Ruiyun, saying, "The Prince Ding mansion's upbringing, I'm afraid that the sixth prince doesn't need to judge. Sixth prince, please go back. Our place is small and can't accommodate someone of your noble status." Yili was really angry. Mo Ruiyun's words were not only directed at Mo Xiaobao, but also the entire Prince Ding mansion and the people who taught Mo Xiaobao. As for the reason he said this, Yili naturally could see it. It wasn't because he had any grudges with the Prince Ding mansion, it was only because he was jealous of Mo Xiaobao. A prince who had been doted on since he was young, but because of this little bit of jealousy, he actually spoke ill of others. This kind of character was enough to make people dislike him. This prince didn't say anything wrong. Mo Ruiyun didn't think that Yili would ask him to leave as soon as he opened his mouth. Although his mother wasn't doted on in the palace, his imperial father liked him. Even the son of noble consort Lu who was doted on had to yield to him. The upbringing of my son is only for us parents to worry about. I wonder what status does the sixth prince have to worry about this matter? Yi Li indifferently asked. Mo Ruiyun was speechless and could only fiercely glare at Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao wasn't willing to jump out and argue with him at this time. It would make him seem like he really didn't have any upbringing. He arrogantly snorted and hid in Mo Xiaoyao's embrace. Imperial father, this child was wrong. This child will go back and properly ask maternal grandfather about etiquette. Mo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He said to Zhuo Jing and the others who were waiting on the side, invite the sixth prince back. Zhuo Jing waved his hand and the guards naturally came forward to send the guest off. The eunuch who was still holding the imperial edict remembered his duty and hurriedly said, Prince Ding, this is the emperor's decree. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, what does Emperor Chu's decree have to do with I? You can take it back. Tell Mo Jingqi that his taste is really good. The eunuch who delivered the edict also knew that there was nothing he could do. He could only put away the imperial edict and say, the emperor has already given the order to unseal the Prince Ding mansion and return the Prince Ding mansion's properties in the capital that were seized to the prince. The inn is simple and crude. I ask that the prince move back to the mansion to rest so that Wang Fei and He Shizhi will not be wronged. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the eunuch with a smile and said with a smile, you really know how to speak. Go back and tell Mo Jingqi. I will accept this gift. It was finally done. The eunuch let out a sigh of relief and hurriedly left respectfully. After sending off this large group of people, Yi Li frowned and said, what is Mo Jingqi's intention now? Is this the good show you were talking about? Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, isn't it a good show? I've already said that Mo Jingqi, this person, has a fickle personality. He is usually ruthless when he turns hostile. He has favored noble consort Lu for many years. For her sake, he went against the Empress Dowager and ignored the Empress. If it wasn't for the fact that he still wanted some face, I'm afraid that he would favor the concubine and destroy the wife. Because of this, he is on the verge of death. When he suddenly learns of noble consort Lu's actions, whether it is true or not, he will resent noble consort Lu. If he wants to be even more extreme, he will hate noble consort Lu to the bone. Yesterday, he was provoked by the Empress Dowager and I. Right now, he won't care about the Dechu state's territory. As long as he can get revenge on Mo Jingli, his mother, and the Lu family, what can't he do? You're saying that Mo Jingqi has completely lost his mind? Yi Li said with a frown. It's not that he has completely lost his mind. In this life, he has always been half crazy and half insane. He doesn't hate the Prince Ding mansion. In the beginning, he only dealt with the Prince Ding mansion because he was afraid that the Prince Ding mansion would threaten his throne. But now, he is about to die. I also didn't threaten his throne. On the contrary, his mother, brother, and the people who sleep next to him are all plotting against him. Compared to I, he only hates them. Right now, let alone the Prince Ding mansion, even if I wanted to be the regent, he would agree. He has already been blinded by hatred. He only wants revenge. Mo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. Yi Li pondered for a moment. It was really as Mo Xiaoyao said. In fact, Mo Jingqi's personality wasn't suitable to be the emperor. He was too sensitive and paranoid. His intelligence could only be considered average. It was because he knew his own mediocrity that he was even more uneasy. Once he had power, it was very easy for him to go to extremes. Just like the matter of the Prince Ding mansion. The imperial family wanted to take away the Prince Ding mansion's power. It definitely wasn't something that only happened in the past 2 generations. However, with so many emperors, not a single one was as rough as him. However, it was probably because he caught them off guard that he almost succeeded. It was a pity that the heavens didn't want to destroy the Prince Ding mansion. It could only be said that it was the will of the heavens. In short, Mo Jingqi was someone who was very bad at balance. The most important thing for an emperor was to understand the way of balance. Xiaoyao already knew this would happen. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile, after dealing with him for so many years, I can be considered to have some understanding of him. It's a pity, even if the Prince Ding mansion has been loyal to the Dechu state for generations, I definitely won't agree to his request this time. His wishful thinking will be for naught. Why? Yi Li raised an eyebrow. Although Mo Jingqi's move was a messy one, it wasn't a bad one. Once this self-condemnation decree was released, if Mo Jingqi died, the Prince Ding mansion's refusal would only cause criticism among the people. It wasn't that the people didn't know how to distinguish between right and wrong, but that the people placed too much importance on the self-condemnation decree. In the past dynasties, as long as it wasn't that they couldn't survive, there was almost no problem that the self-condemnation decree couldn't solve. No matter what the emperor did, as long as the self-condemnation decree was released, the people would forgive them. After all, the idea of being loyal to the emperor had always lingered in the minds of the people. Mo Xiaoyao sighed slightly. He lowered his head to look at Mo Xiaobao, who had already fallen asleep in his embrace. After the ruckus just now, Mo Xiaobao had fallen asleep after listening to his parents talk for less than a quarter of an hour. There was even transparent drool hanging from the side of his mouth. This kid looks very obedient, but he's actually very confident and arrogant. He's even more arrogant than I was when I was young. I'm afraid that when he grows up, he won't be inferior to others. Moreover, now that the Prince Ding mansion has already broken free from the cage of the Dechu state, it's up to him in the future. Could it be that I, as his father, can personally lock him back in? After the events of the past few years, who wouldn't have any grudges in their hearts? When the time comes, it'll just be a repeat of the Prince Ding mansion's many years of predicament. Yi Li understood what he meant. Even if the royal family kept their promise, Mo Xiaoyao had great power in this generation, and the Prince Ding mansion's wealth would be unparalleled. Their future generations would once again fall into the same predicament they had experienced, or even worse. No matter what other people think, Xiaobao and I will always be by your side. Yi Li said softly. I know that we will always be together. Chapter 593. Once the decree came out, the entire capital was shaken. In an instant, there was an endless stream of people who came to the inn to visit Prince Ding. It was as if a scene of Prince Ding Fu being revived had appeared in front of her eyes. Of course, no one thought that Prince Ding would not be able to defeat Prince Li, nor did they think that Prince Ding did not even plan to participate in this battle. The nobles who had already boarded the princely manor or the Lu family's ship could not help but complain in their hearts, but there was nothing they could do. It was easy to get on the ship, but hard to get off. It was too late to regret. At this time, in the imperial palace, the empress was sitting on a phoenix chair, frowning as she listened to the sixth prince angrily complain about the grievances he had suffered. Looking at the angry and resentful child in front of her, the empress shook her head in disappointment. Beside her, consort Zheng Xian was also disappointed. When she heard Mo Ruiyun clamoring for imperial father to punish them, she could not help but slap him. The sixth prince was stunned by this sudden slap. He touched his face and looked at consort Zheng Xian in a daze, unable to say anything. The empress sighed and softly said, "What's the use of hitting him now?" All these years, she had been grounded in the palace, and the power of the harem had fallen into the hands of consort Lu. Consort Lu was the reason why the sixth prince had been taught this way, but consort Zheng Xian, as his mother, had also neglected her duty. Even she, the empress, was, "Imperial mother, why did you hit me?" The sixth prince finally recovered and angrily asked consort Zheng Xian. He had clearly been wronged outside. It was fine if imperial mother did not help him vent his anger, but she actually hit him? How could Mo Ruiyun, who had always been pampered, endure this? Seeing that her son did not seem to understand her intentions, consort Zheng Xian could not help but burst into tears. She threw herself into a chair and cried bitterly. Seeing imperial mother like this, Mo Ruiyun pouted and muttered, "Since imperial mother does not help son vent his anger, son will go find imperial father." Imperial father likes me, so he will definitely help me. I will catch that brat from the Prince Ding mansion and beat him up. I will make him my servant. Shut up. Consort Zheng Xian was so scared that her face turned pale. She pulled Mo Ruiyun and said, Prince Ding is an elder. In terms of seniority, even that Prince Ding is a generation older than you. You just have to listen to what they say and remember it. Don't speak nonsense. How could Mo Ruiyun be willing to listen? He said unhappily, I'm a prince. Why should I listen to them? I must make Imperial Father punish them severely. After saying that, she pushed Zheng Xianfei's hand away and ran out. Seeing this, the Empress, who was sitting on the phoenix chair, slammed the table and said sternly, Stop the sixth prince. Since the sixth prince was stopped, he was naturally furious and threatened to kill these eunuchs and palace maids. The Empress stared at him and said coldly, I was the one who wanted to stop you. Are you going to kill I too? Take him away and keep an eye on the sixth prince. If he runs out, you will be held accountable. Mo Ruiyun was still a bit afraid of this mother that he had only seen a few times. Seeing that the Empress was truly angry, he didn't dare to cause trouble and obediently went to the inner hall. The Empress rubbed her eyebrows and looked at Zheng Xianfei, saying, Don't cry. Prince Ding won't argue with an ignorant child. Now that you have seen it clearly, is Ruiyun suitable for that position? Zheng Xianfei was a bit embarrassed and stopped crying. She came from a small family. Knowing that her son had a chance to ascend the throne, she would become the Empress Dowager. How could she not be moved? But now, seeing her son's ignorant appearance, she had been in the palace for so many years and had some experience. Leaving the palace once, he had offended the entire Prince Ding mansion. He didn't know what was important and what was not. Even if he ascended the throne, he wouldn't be able to sit for more than a few days before being harmed. Woo-woo. It's all because of that slut. That slut led my son astray. Woo-woo. Empress, you have to make a decision for this concubine. Zheng Xianfei's heart was filled with hatred for noble consort Lu. These years, the emperor had doted on noble consort Lu and had given her the entire harem. As the birth mother of a prince, she could only see her son twice a year. Now that her son had been taught to be like this, her dream of becoming the Empress Dowager was shattered. How could she not hate noble consort Lu? The Empress impatiently waved her hand and said, Enough. What's the use of saying this now? Regarding Mo Jingqi's suggestion, the Empress had completely suppressed it. With the sixth prince's character, what could he teach? She could sacrifice herself for the imperial family because she was the Empress. She was married to Mo Jingqi. But she couldn't sacrifice the Hua family for the imperial family and Mo Jingqi. The Hua family had done enough for the Dechu state. This concubine knows her wrongs. Zheng Xianfei wiped her tears and knelt on the ground. This concubine doesn't ask for my son to have any great achievements. I only ask that he be safe. He's not sensible. It's all my fault for not befriending him. I beg Empress to plead with Prince Ding on behalf of this concubine and ask him to forgive my son. You can get up. The Empress sighed. I said before that although Prince Ding isn't a magnanimous person, he won't get angry over an insensible child. If I can see Princess Ding later, I will tell her. But Ruiyun, you really need to teach him well. Don't mention the imperial family, it's a taboo even in a normal family. Zheng Xianfei quickly thanked her and promised to teach the sixth prince well. After bidding farewell, the Empress went to the rear hall to pick up the sixth prince. Looking at her departing figure, the Empress sighed softly. How long could she be the Empress? Zheng Xianfei. Whether or not the Empress could teach the sixth prince well had nothing to do with her. Forget it. At least her Wuyo was living peacefully in the northwest. This was very good. The eunuch who had followed Mo Ruiyun to deliver the edict returned to the palace to report that Mo Xiuyao had refused to accept the edict. Mo Jingqi was silent for a long time before he weakly waved his hand to have the eunuch leave. The eunuch who had delivered the edict seemed to have been pardoned and quickly left. The moment he turned to close the door, he saw the emperor sitting on the dragon throne with a never-before-seen savagery and madness in his gloomy eyes. His heart trembled and he quickly closed the door. With the emperor's edict, the subordinates were very efficient. The original Prince Ding mansion had only been sealed up. Because of the influence the Prince Ding mansion had on the Dechu state, Mo Jingqi did not dare to use the mansion for other purposes in a short period of time. So after the mansion was reopened, the people needed to clean it up again. 2 days later, they came to report to Mo Xiaoyao and ask Prince Ding and Wang Fei to move back to the Wang Fu. Mo Xiaoyao naturally would not be polite. This Wang Fu was the foundation of the Prince Ding mansion's ancestors. It was also where the Prince Ding lived for the past 200 years. When they had first settled in the northwest and given up on the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao still had people secretly take care of this place. So even after 6 or 7 years, the entire Wang Fu was still very well preserved. When the family of 3 officially moved into Ding Palace, the number of people who came to pay their respects naturally increased. This proved that the previous imperial edict was not false. The Prince Ding mansion was really going to return to the Dechu state and Jing. Chapter 594. Although Mo Xiaoyao refused most of the visitors, he couldn't refuse some of them. In the afternoon when they returned to the prince's mansion, the guards outside came to report that Great Elder Princess Fuxi and Zhaoyang Princess wanted to see the prince. Zhaoyang Princess was easy to persuade, but Great Elder Princess couldn't refuse. He had to ask someone to invite them in. Great Elder Princess was now 80 years old, much older than a few years ago. Although she looked good, her health was obviously not as good as before. Supported by Zhaoyang Princess and maids, she slowly walked in. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li immediately took Mo Xiaobao to greet her. Great Elder Princess. Great Elder Princess looked at Mo Xiaoyao with white hair standing in front of her calmly. A trace of heartache and relief flashed across her wrinkled face. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao helplessly and said, "It seems that you really hate the royal family so much that you don't even want to recognize me as your aunt?" Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes and still called her aunt. Great Elder Princess was delighted. Her eyes fell on Mo Xiaobao who was standing aside, and her eyes lit up with affection. "Is this little Yuchen? He looks like you when you were a child." Zhaoyang Princess smiled and said, "Aunt, Zhaoyang thinks this little heir looks more lovable than Xiaoyao when he was a child." Great Elder Princess nodded with a smile and said, "Yes." Mo Xiaobao was not timid. Standing beside Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, he gracefully stepped forward and bowed to them. "Nice to meet you, Aunt Zhaoyang." "Good boy, good boy." Great Elder Princess said with a smile. She took out a dagger she carried with her and handed it to Mo Xiaobao, saying, "I didn't prepare a gift for you. Take this little thing and play with it." It was a small and exquisite dagger. The hilt and scabbard were inlaid with all kinds of gemstones. Once the dagger was pulled out, the blade was so shiny that it could reflect one's reflection. It was obviously a treasured dagger. Xiaobao turned to look at his parents. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. "I don't dare to refuse an elder's gift. Keep it." Mo Xiaobao also liked this little thing very much, so he was happy to hear his father's words. He took the dagger with both hands and said in a clear voice, "Thank you, madam." His cute little face was serious and respectful, which made Great Elder Princess applaud him repeatedly. Zhaoyang Princess took out a jade pendant and handed it to Mo Xiaobao. She smiled and said, "Auntie doesn't have a sword to give you. This jade pendant looks good. Yu Chen, keep it and play with it." Mo Xiaobao accepted the gifts and thanked Zhaoyang Princess. Great Elder Princess and Zhaoyang Princess looked at the little bun, who was only as tall as Mo Xiaoyao's thigh. Not only was he handsome, but his temperament showed that he was well educated. Thinking of the children in the emperor's palace, they found that the emperor had many princes, but they were not as good as the 4 or 5-year-old child in the Prince Ding mansion. Looking at the gentle and elegant Princess Ding, who was standing beside Mo Xiaoyao, they couldn't help but sigh. Only such a woman could give birth to and raise such an excellent son. Aunt, Xiaoyang Princess, it's still a little cold now. Why don't we sit inside? Yili chuckled and led them to the hall. Now that they had just moved back, there were not many people in the Prince Ding mansion. There were no more than 100 guards and maids in total, which was less than 1/3 of the previous number. Therefore, the big mansion looked particularly quiet and bleak. After entering the hall, the guests and the host took their seats. Great Elder Princess pulled Mo Xiaobao to the front and asked him carefully. Mo Xiaobao had a good impression of this old man who was as amiable as his grandfather, so he answered her question seriously. Xiaoyang Princess beside them couldn't help laughing and said, "It turns out that the little heir is taught by Mr. Qingyun himself. No wonder he has such a temperament at such a young age." "How is Mr. Qingyun now?" Yili said with a smile, "Although my grandfather is old, he is still healthy. Occasionally, he will teach the students of the academy." Chen really benefited a lot from being raised by him. Great Elder Princess looked at Mo Xiaobao with a smile, then looked up at Yili and Mo Xiaoyao and sighed, "The emperor did something stupid." "Is Mr. Qingyun used to living in the northwest?" Yili said, "Aunt, thank you for your concern. My grandfather used to travel around the world when he was young. Although the northwest is a bit colder than Yunzhou, it's still bearable. My grandfather has been relaxed these years, and his spirit is much better than before." Great Elder Princess and Xiaoyang Princess looked at each other and fell silent. They naturally understood what Yili meant. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili must also know why they came here. However, in their positions, there were many things they had to do even if they didn't want to. Mo Xiaoyao held the teacup, stared at the tea in the cup calmly, and said nothing. Yili's lips curled into a smile, but she had no intention of speaking again. For a moment, there was a touch of dignity and awkwardness in the hall. After a long time, Great Elder Princess sighed, looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Xiaoyao, what do you think of the Emperor's imperial edict?" Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and said with a faint smile, "Aunt, you are my elder. For the sake of your care for me, I shouldn't lie to you." Xiaoyao has also told the emperor this. The Prince Ding mansion has already cut off all ties with the Dechu state. The emperor's edict means nothing to the Prince Ding mansion. Great Elder Princess closed her eyes, and her wrinkled face looked more tired and haggard. Is it really irreversible? After all, the Prince Ding mansion and the royal family. After all, we are still a family. Mo Xiaoyao smiled coldly. The hatred of killing my father and brother, the hatred of tens of thousands of heroes of the Mahist army, and the fact that the Prince Ding mansion ruled the northwest these years. Who can forget it? The royal family of the Dechu state can't, nor can the Prince Ding mansion, the Mahist army, and I, can't. Forget it. I know I can't persuade you. Great Elder Princess didn't force him and just shook her head helplessly. She watched Mo Xiaoyao grow up and experience so many things. Now Mo Xiaoyao seemed as calm as the sea and unfathomable. But the turbulent waves at the bottom of the sea were no gentler than the fiery waves when he was a teenager. For many things, once he made up his mind. No matter how difficult the road ahead was, he would never turn back. But the current situation of the Dechu state, without the support of the Prince Ding mansion, Great Elder Princess didn't know what kind of situation it would face. Just looking at the ministers and nobles who were arguing with each other in the Qingjing Hall, Great Elder Princess, who was known as an iron fist when she was young but now had gray hair, only felt a burst of powerlessness in her heart. They were all old. Emperor Taizu was a genius, but now the Dechu state had no successor. Since Great Elder Princess gave up persuading him, Xiaoyang Princess naturally didn't say anything more. She didn't have Great Elder Princess's strategy, but she had sacrificed her life's happiness for the Dechu state. A princess's marriage was presided over by a duke, so she was called a princess. As a royal princess, she had no right to refute. Therefore, when her brother needed to form an alliance with Nanzhao, she had to marry the prince of Nanzhao without any regrets. When Dechu state no longer needed this consort of Nanzhao, she had to live as a widow for the rest of her life without any regrets. Now, if the Dechu state fell because of the incompetence of his descendants, all she could do was to be buried with him. Great Elder Princess knew Mo Xiuyao well, and so did Xiaoyang Princess. So the reason why she accompanied Great Elder Princess today was that she wanted to see Mo Xiuyao and the little heir that she had never met before. After putting aside their positions, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became much more harmonious. In fact, Great Elder Princess was probably entrusted by Mo Jingqi to persuade him. As for the result, Great Elder Princess had already known in her heart before she came. Therefore, she didn't persuade him very much. She just roughly understood Mo Xiuyao's intention. If she took a step back, she could still save some old friendship. In this case, when the emperor Xiuyao, go back to the northwest as soon as possible. The capital. I'm afraid there won't be any peaceful days. Great Elder Princess sighed. Princess, can you and Aunt Xiaoyang go back to the northwest with us? Mo Xiaobao looked up at Great Elder Princess and said crisply. Great Elder Princess was stunned. She looked at Mo Xiaobao lovingly and shook her head, saying, I can't go to the northwest with you. Why? Mo Xiaobao tilted his little head and asked in confusion. In Mo Xiaobao's opinion, there were great-grandpas, uncles, and many good people in Glass City. They were much more fun than the Chu capital. In Glass City, he could run around and play by himself, but in the Chu capital, he couldn't even go out and play with little dummy Leng. Second Uncle Leng said that there were too many bad people in the Chu capital, so children couldn't go out to play. Great Elder Princess said softly, because Granny's home is here. Oh. Mo Xiaobao didn't quite understand. His parents' home was in Glass City. If she asked him to live in the Chu capital all the time, he wouldn't agree. That's why Grand Aunt Huang can't bear to leave home. Mo Xiuyao put down the teacup and looked at Great Elder Princess, saying, Aunt, Mo Jingqi should think about the future instead of working on me. It's not that the Prince Ding mansion can't support the young master, but it won't do it again. What was the origin of the disaster of the Prince Ding mansion? Wasn't it because his father supported the former emperor? The Prince Ding mansion had made outstanding contributions. In addition, they supported the young master to be the regent, which had made the royal family vigilant against the Prince Ding mansion. Since ancient times, how many powerful officials could have a good ending? Now that Prince Ding Fu had come to this stage, it was determined that they would not turn back. Great Elder Princess smiled helplessly. It was not that Mo Jingqi still didn't know what was important. It was that he had no choice at all. Except for the two sons of noble consort Lu, there were almost no good princes in the imperial harem. If the crown prince really ascended the throne and the Lu family was in power, Great Elder Princess could imagine the situation without guessing. Facing the current situation, Great Elder Princess was powerless even if she wanted to. They looked regretfully at Mo Xiaobao who was sitting beside them. If one of the princes had 70% of Prince Ding's heir apparent's intelligence, these old bones, would do their best to help the little prince become a talent. Unfortunately. Chapter 595. In the study of Prince Li's mansion, Mo Jingli's face was distorted and full of anger. Even the most favored Princess Xixia did not dare to approach him. By the time Mo Jingli finally finished venting the anger in his heart, the entire study was already in a mess. The counselors and subordinates of Prince Li's mansion standing in the corner naturally did not dare to speak. Princess Xixia had to muster up the courage to say, Prince, it's not convenient to discuss here. Why don't we move to the side hall? Mo Jingli snorted and walked out of the study. The others hurriedly followed him. Prince, what happened? Sitting down in the side hall outside the study, someone finally summoned up the courage to ask. Mo Jingli said coldly, after Great Elder Princess and Xiaoyang Princess left the palace, they went to see Mo Xiuyao. Everyone was shocked. Emperor, what do you mean? Mo Jingli sneered and said, what else can he mean? Of course, he asked Great Elder Princess to intercede with Mo Xiuyao. He has been competing with Mo Xiuyao all his life. At the end of the day, he got over it. Everyone immediately frowned and shook their heads. Prince, if this is the case, it will be very unfavorable for us. The emperor would rather give up the previous grudges and suspicion of Prince Ding Mansion to ask for help from Prince Ding. It was obvious that he wanted to kill Prince Li's mansion. Mo Jingli snorted and said disdainfully, Mo Xiuyao will not agree. What's more, even if Mo Xiuyao agrees to help, how can I be so easy to deal with now? Everyone looked at the cold-faced man in front of them and was stunned. It took them a while to come to their senses. Wasn't it? Prince Li was no longer the Prince Li of many years ago. He was the Prince Regent of Dechu State, and he controlled half of the richest southern part of Dechu State. Not to mention that Prince Ding's influence was now in the northwest. Even if the Prince Ding mansion was at its peak in the Chu capital, it would not be able to deal with Prince Li in a short period of time. What plans does the prince have? I'm afraid His Majesty will not. A strategist said with a frown. They had originally hoped that the Empress Dowager could persuade His Majesty to officially pass the title to Li Wang. In fact, this idea itself was somewhat whimsical. With the emperor's temperament, even if the fish dies and the net splits, he would not let the throne fall into the hands of the person who killed him. Mo Jingli frowned. He pondered for a moment and said, spread the news. The Lu family must hear it. Just say that the emperor intends to pass the throne to the sixth prince. As for the rest, the Lu clan will know what to do. Prince is wise. If the Li Palace could receive the news, the Lu family would not be any slower than them. There was no need for the Li Palace to spread the news. The Lu family and even noble consort Lu in the palace had already received the news. In the palace, noble consort Lu heard the palace maid who came to report the news and coldly dismissed her. She waved her hand and smashed the white porcelain teacup in her hand into pieces. Sixth Prince. Mo Ruiyun. Tan Jiji was sitting in a chair not far away with a smile. He said with a smile, it seems His Majesty already knows noble consort's plans. This one has said before that noble consort is too impatient in her actions. You have to know, there are some things that are almost certain, but aren't there some exceptions? Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth. She remembered that when she came back from outside the palace a few days ago, she happened to run into Mo Jingli coming out of His Majesty's bedroom. It seemed that starting from that day, many things were out of her control. Mo Jingli. It must be him. Tan Jiji said with a frown, noble consort, it is not important who is behind this. The important thing is, what should we do? Noble consort Lu was upset. In fact, she was not good at these things. She had been protected since she was a child. Except for her feelings for Mo Xiuyao, everything else had gone smoothly for her. Even though she was smart and learned, noble consort Lu couldn't figure out how to deal with the situation in front of her. She looked back at Tan Jiji and asked, do you have any ideas? Tan Jiji smiled and said indifferently, in for a penny, in for a pound. Kill. Noble consort Lu was stunned. She lowered her head and thought about Tan Jiji's proposal seriously. She had been in the palace for decades. Even though she was loved by Mo Jingqi and had almost the same power as the empress, she had killed people. Women like her, who had been trained to be sent into the palace since childhood, probably never cared about human lives. After thinking for a while, noble consort Lu raised her head. A trace of killing intent flashed through her cold eyes. She said indifferently, okay. You go and do it. With the help of the Lu family and noble consort Lu's power in the palace, Tan Jiji did things neatly. Before it got dark, the news came that the sixth prince fell down accidentally while playing on the rockery and was unconscious. When the news came, the 12-year-old crown prince was sitting in front of noble consort Lu and talking to her. Noble consort Lu waved her hand indifferently to let the eunuch who came to report leave. The crown prince hesitated for a while. He looked at noble consort Lu and said, "Mother, should I go and see my sixth brother?" A trace of disdain flashed across noble consort Lu's face. She raised the crown prince's childish little face and looked at it carefully. She hid the disgust in her eyes and said indifferently, "Why go and see him? He is the son of a lowly official's daughter. Do you really think he is your younger brother? You have to remember that you are the crown prince. You will be the emperor of the Dechu state in the future. Other than imperial concubine mother, everyone else is your servant." The crown prince moved the corners of his mouth. He wanted to say that he had a younger brother and sister. But looking at his mother's beautiful face, which was like a snow sculpture, he felt a chill down his spine. He didn't know why, but he didn't say anything in the end. Noble consort Lu nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "Then you are my good son. Don't worry. I will make you the emperor." "Yes, mother." The sixth prince's sudden serious injury made Mo Jingqi's body, which was already very weak, even worse. When the news reached Mo Jingqi's ears, Mo Jingqi couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. But the royal doctors in front of him were secretly shocked. The emperor's gray and gloomy face suddenly had some color. He seemed to be much more energetic. But these experienced royal doctors all knew that this was the final radiance of the setting sun. They hurriedly gave a look to the outside and asked someone to inform the masters in the palace to come. This time, noble consort Lu was the first to come. There was no other reason than the fact that the most favored noble consort Lu lived in the place closest to the emperor's bedroom. The guards at the door didn't stop her. As soon as noble consort Lu stepped into the hall, she smelled a smell of blood and the decaying smell of a long illness. She couldn't help but frown in disgust. Since Mo Jingqi fell ill, this was the second time noble consort Lu had stepped into this bedroom. They hadn't seen each other for several months. "Your Majesty." Noble consort Lu called indifferently. Mo Jingqi stared at the cold-faced woman in white without turning his eyes. After a while, he waved his hand and said, "I have something to say to noble consort Lu. You can all leave." Everyone responded and left. Only noble consort Lu and Mo Jingqi were left in the empty bedroom. One of them was lying down and the other was standing. They stood not far away and looked at each other as if they had known each other for the first time. Mo Jingqi stared fixedly at the woman in front of him, trying to discern the slightest trace of emotion from her cold eyes. Unfortunately, he was still very disappointed. Noble consort Lu's cold eyes were calm as if the person lying in front of her was not the emperor who doted on her so much, but a commoner she didn't know. No, there was still a trace of emotion in her eyes. That was disgust. In front of her, Mo Jingqi was so thin that he almost didn't look like a human being. And there was also the blood that the palace maids didn't have time to clean up. Noble consort Lu was very annoyed by everything. She was so annoyed that she even threw away her previous disguise. Chapter 596. You're finally here. Mo Jingqi finally speaks. Noble consort Lu frowns slightly, saying, "You don't want me to come?" Mo Jingqi smiles bitterly, saying, "Really didn't want you to come so soon. Did you send someone to hurt Rueyun?" Noble consort Lu raises her eyebrows slightly, raises her chin, and looks down at Mo Jingqi, saying indifferently, "It's not my fault." "Why did you do that?" Mo Jingqi asks, "I thought you didn't care about anything. Now it seems I was wrong." Noble consort Lu tilts her head and looks at Mo Jingqi, slowly showing a mocking smile, saying, "Why did you do that?" "I want to ask you, since you've made my son the crown prince, why do you want to pass the throne to the sixth prince? What do you want to do to me and the crown prince? A trace of sadness and coldness appears in Mo Jingqi's eyes. It seems that I've spoiled you too much these years. That's why you forgot one thing. What thing? Noble consort Lu frowns. Thunder, rain, and dew are all thanks to you. Mo Jingqi says, the throne is mine. I can pass it to whoever I want. I can make whoever I want to be the crown prince. If I want to give it to you, you can't refuse it. If I don't want to give it to you, you can't accept it either. Noble consort Lu is startled, and a trace of displeasure appears on her cold face. As proud as she is used to being superior to everyone except Mo Xiuyao, including Mo Jingqi, who is the ruler of a country. What do you mean, Your Majesty? Mo Jingqi smiles coldly. What do I mean? I mean, even if you kill the sixth prince, I can still pass the throne to someone else. Even if you kill all the princes, I can still pass the throne to someone from the imperial clan. As for your crown prince, don't even think about it. Why did you do that? Noble consort Lu stares at Mo Jingqi, her beautiful face full of confusion. It was as if Mo Jingqi had done something unreasonable. Mo Jingqi laughed out loud, but the pain in his chest made his laughter sound broken. Why? Soon you will know why. We have treated you well all these years, but how did you repay us? Do you really think that our patience towards you is limitless? Ha! You want the crown prince to ascend the throne, is it really for the crown prince? You want Mo Xiuyao, in your dreams. Even if I die, you must accompany me. What do you mean by that? Noble consort Lu said in surprise and anger. Of course, she knew what Mo Jingqi meant. Although the Chu state did not have a system of burial with the emperor, there were still one or two examples of emperors who had ordered their favorite young concubines to be buried with the emperor at the last minute. She just couldn't believe that Mo Jingqi would have such thoughts. Of course, it was also because she didn't want to accept such a fate no matter what. She still had a lot of things to do. She still had to obtain Mo Xiuyao's love, and she still had to become Princess Ding. How could she be buried with Mo Jingqi? Mo Jingqi chuckled, closed his eyes, and didn't say anything else. As a result, Noble consort Lu's guess was confirmed. Noble consort Lu's face was pale, but her mind was spinning fast. After a while, she suddenly turned around and hurried out of the hall, but she bumped into the Empress and the others who had rushed over after receiving the news. The Empress frowned and said, Noble consort Lu, what are you doing? Noble consort Lu didn't have time to talk to the Empress. She glanced at her and then walked out of the hall without saying a word. The Empress frowned, but didn't want to argue, so she took her people into the bedroom. The news that the emperor was about to die naturally spread quickly. In less than an hour, the high-ranking princes and princesses of the imperial family had all arrived at the emperor's bedroom. The originally empty bedroom was bustling with people kneeling on the ground. Even the old people like Great Elder Princess and Duke Hua, as well as Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li, whose identities were a little awkward and strange now, were invited here. However, they were different from the princes who were kneeling on the ground. Mo Xiuyao, dressed in casual white clothes and white hair, stood together with Yi Li and Great Elder Princess. Of course, he didn't have the mournful look on his face, which others didn't know whether it was real or fake. He had been struggling hard these days, but when he was about to die, he became much calmer. Mo Jingqi opened his eyes in the sobbing sound, and he saw Mo Xiuyao, who was the most eye-catching one. He smiled faintly and said, I knew you would come to see me off eventually. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. The Empress Dowager, who was sitting at the head of the bed, let out a cry. She stepped forward and held Mo Jingqi's hand, sobbing, My son, what do you want to say to your mother? Mo Jingqi gave the Empress Dowager a strange smile. His eyes swept across the Empress Dowager and looked at Mo Jingqi and the Empress standing not far away. After noble consort Lu ran out, she was nowhere to be seen. At this time, Mo Jingqi didn't care about her whereabouts. Finally, his eyes turned from Prime Minister Lu to the princes and princesses kneeling on the ground. Changel, of course, Princess Changel was not among the princes and princesses. Since childhood, Mo Jingqi had loved this daughter very much. Not only because she was the legitimate daughter of the emperor, but also because she was smart, lively, and considerate. Even though Mo Jingqi doted on noble consort Lu, her daughter, Princess Zhening, was ranked after Princess Changel. However, at the same time, he was the most ruthless towards this daughter of his. It was only because she was the legitimate daughter of the empress, the granddaughter of the Hua family, that he feared. As a result, he could not keep her in the capital. Hearing Mo Jingqi call out her daughter's name, the empress sadly turned her face away. The veins on Du Hua's aged face throbbed twice. In the end, he did not say anything. Mo Xiaobao stood by his father and mother's side. Although he did not understand the meaning of the situation before him, he could feel the sorrow and solemnity within. Raising his head to look at Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li, he did not speak of Princess Changel's situation in Glass City. Finally, it was the Empress Dowager who sighed. Patting Mo Jingqi's hand, she said, "Has your Majesty forgotten? That girl Changel's fate was not good. She went missing in Nanzhao." Mo Jingqi closed his eyes, acting as if he did not hear the Empress Dowager's words. Everyone present, with the exception of the 3 members of the Prince Ding mansion who had nothing to do with this matter, as well as the young and ignorant little prince and princess, worriedly stared at the man who seemed to be on the verge of death on the dragon bed. Even though he was so weak that he could not even raise his hand, he was still able to decide the fate of the majority of those present. Empress. After a long time, Mo Jingqi finally called out. Hearing this, the Empress stepped forward and asked, "Your Majesty, what instructions does your Majesty have?" Mo Jingqi no longer had the strength to speak loudly. He raised his eyes and glanced at the Empress Dowager. Somewhat displeased, the Empress Dowager stood up and gave the Empress her seat, standing to the side in embarrassment. The Empress sat by the bed, calmly looking at Mo Jingqi. She asked, "What does your Majesty want to say to your servant?" With great difficulty, Mo Jingqi raised his hand and pulled out a piece of bright yellow cloth from under his pillow. With great difficulty, he placed it in the Empress's hands and said, posthumous edict." Hearing this, all the people present narrowed their eyes and fixed their eyes on the bright yellow cloth in the Empress's hand. No one knew when Mo Jingqi wrote the posthumous edict or when he put it under the pillow. Great Elder Princess. Duke Hua. Prince Ding, as witnesses, the Empress, reads the posthumous edict. Mo Jingqi said intermittently. Hearing this, Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows with great interest and said with a smile, "Okay, I promise that the Empress will read the posthumous edict smoothly." Great Elder Princess also nodded and said, "Your Majesty, please rest assured." "Yes, Your Majesty." It was as if he had completed a major task. Mo Jingqi breathed a sigh of relief, and his face became even gloomier. He said to the crowd lightly, "You can leave. I want to be alone." Everyone was in a dilemma and did not know whether they should leave or not. Mo Jingli stared at Mo Jingqi with a gloomy face. Finally, he stepped forward and asked, "Where is the child?" Mo Jingqi looked at him with a smile and laughed out loud. Mo Jingli said sternly, "I asked you where the child is." Mo Jingqi smiled but did not say anything. Blood slowly flowed out of his mouth. Mo Jingqi. Mo Jingli could not help but step forward and wanted to pull his clothes. The Empress Dowager hurriedly stopped him. "Li Er, what are you doing?" At this time, the emperor was dying. If Mo Jingli pulled him and he died, no matter what the cause of the emperor's death was, Mo Jingli would not be able to escape the crime of regicide. Mo Jingli also knew that he was impulsive. However, he had tried his best these days to find his only son's whereabouts, but he still had no clue. If Mo Jingqi was really dead, she was afraid that the only clue would be lost. Princely, can't you see it? Emperor Chu is obviously speechless. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile. Although it was rude to smile when the emperor of a country was about to die, no one dared to say that because of Mo Xiaoyao's identity. Mo Jingqi lay quietly on the bed. The blood in his mouth had dyed the bed and clothes around his neck dark red. His eyes were fixed on Mo Jingli, with a strange smile on his face. For some reason, Mo Jingli only felt a chill in his heart when he saw that smile. Chapter 597. Because of Mo Jingqi's words, everyone left the bedchamber, leaving him alone for the last time. No one knew what this emperor, who had been busy all his life but seemed to have achieved nothing, would write in his last moments. Mo Xiaoyao walked beside Great Elder Princess and Duke Hua with Mo Xiaobao in his arms and Yi Li in the other hand. Now, there were only 2 true elders left in this country. The rest of the people walked behind him, not too far and not too close. At this moment, no one was in the mood to turn around and leave the palace. The emperor's posthumous edict was still in the hands of the empress, and Great Elder Princess, Duke Hua, and Prince Ding were watching over it. Naturally, no one could get in the way. But they also didn't leave in a hurry. They sat down in the pavilion of the imperial garden. The pavilion was not big, so only Great Elder Princess, Duke Hua, Mo Xiaoyao, and Yi Li were sitting in it. Duke Hua looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a smile and then looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was sitting on Mo Xiaoyao's knees. He said with a smile, "Prince Ding looks much better these years than when he was in the capital." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for a few years, but you are still as healthy as before." Duke Hua shook his head and sighed, "I'm old." It was a little quiet in the pavilion. After a while, Duke Hua asked, "What's Prince Ding's plan for the future?" Mo Xiaoyao was a little surprised. He looked up at Duke Hua and raised his eyebrows, saying, "Won't you persuade me?" Duke Hua shook his head and said helplessly, "Since this situation has been broken, why should we repeat the same mistake? A broken mirror reuniting wasn't completely flawless. What's more, the Chu state has restrained the Prince Ding mansion for too long. Now the dragon is flying in the sky. No matter it succeeds or fails, I'm afraid that no one can change it. Don't you think so, Prince Ding?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly, neither admitting nor denying it. Although Duke Hua had spent his entire life on the battlefield, it didn't mean that he didn't know anything about politics. The return of the Prince Ding mansion to the Dechu state was what the people of Dechu state and many of the courtiers wanted, but for the Mahist army and the subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion, this was a huge blow. Even though Mo Xiaoyao was the head of the Prince Ding mansion, it was impossible for him to make such a decision without considering the feelings of his subordinates. Hua Guoguo waved his hand and said, "This old man won't be able to see His Highness Prince Ding's glory in the future. However, with Prince Ding's abilities and the support of Wang Fei and many other capable people, he definitely won't disappoint the wishes of the Mahist ancestors." What were the wishes of the Mahist ancestors? Unify the world, pacify the 4 sides, and all nations will come to court. In the history of the Prince Ding mansion, there had been more than one person with such amazing abilities. However, due to various reasons, they all died with regrets. "Old Duke," Great Elder Princess said in surprise. She knew that Duke Hua would not come to persuade Mo Xiaoyao, but from Duke Hua's words, it seemed that he was very confident in the future of the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion. It should be noted that the Prince Ding mansion did not have the upper hand in the overall situation. Duke Hua shook his head and said with a smile, "Great Elder Princess, we are all old. The future depends on the young people." Great Elder Princess was stunned. Looking at the white-haired Duke of Hua in front of her, she frowned. He then looked at his hand, which was full of frowns. Wasn't that right? They were already old. How many more days could they last? Forget it, in the end, Mo Jingqi still died. Whether it was as a son, as a brother, as a father, or as a ruler, he was a failure. Therefore, before his death, he did not ask for his children and grandchildren to gather around him and mourn for the officials. He drove everyone out and breathed his last breath alone in the empty bedchamber. When everyone received the eunuch's report and rushed back to the bedchamber, they saw Mo Jingqi, who had already stopped breathing, lying straight on the bed. The quilt and clothes on his upper body were almost dyed dark red by blood. His eyes were still open, staring blankly at the gorgeous dragon curtain on the top of the bed. Great Elder Princess sighed softly, walked forward, raised her hand to close his eyes, and said, "Let's go outside to listen to the posthumous edict." A heavy bell rang in the imperial city, announcing the death of the emperor in the world. By the will of heaven, Emperor Zhaoyun. Mo Suyun, the 10th son of Emperor Zhaoyun, will be the emperor. He will be abolished as the crown prince and conferred as the king of Qin. The king of Qin's birth mother, noble consort Lu, will be buried with him. The empress's flat voice sounded outside the bedchamber. In the shocked look of everyone, the empress finally looked at the empress dowager sitting aside and frowned. The empress dowager's heart skipped a beat, and she had a bad feeling. Then she heard the empress dowager read the last sentence lightly. The empress dowager will be buried with the former emperor. The posthumous edict. That's impossible. The empress dowager's face was livid. She stood up and roared, "It's you. You tampered with the posthumous edict of His Majesty, didn't you?" The empress was not at all surprised about the content of the posthumous edict. But she had long been used to a calm expression, so she didn't seem to change. She said lightly, "The posthumous edict was given to me by His Majesty in front of everyone. After that, I never left everyone's eyes. Please check it, Empress Dowager." Everyone was silent. That was right. There were so many people and so many pairs of eyes staring at her. Not to mention that the empress was an ordinary woman who didn't know martial arts. Even if she knew some skills, how could she expect that the emperor would give the posthumous edict to her? She still prepared a copy in advance. "No. It's impossible. My son wouldn't do that. Ridiculous." Since ancient times, when an emperor died, he wanted his mother to be buried with him. The Empress Dowager still refused to believe it. There had been no such rule since ancient times, but the posthumous edict said that the Empress Dowager should be buried with the late emperor. In this way, it was not impolite. On the other side, Prime Minister Lu of the Lu family also collapsed to the ground. Not to mention that his grandson didn't become the emperor, his daughter was also buried with him. This sudden impact made this old man who had been in the imperial court all his life unable to bear it. And the other person involved, the 10th Prince Mo Suyun, who was going to rule the world from now on. Everyone looked at the 10th Prince, who was kneeling on the ground with a blank face. The 10th Prince was only 7 years old this year. His birth mother was just a palace maid that Mo Jingqi had an unexpected favor with. After giving birth to Mo Suyun, he wasn't favored and was just casually conferred as a noble. In these years, the mother and son lived in the imperial palace like ghosts, and almost everyone forgot about them. But now, this child with a blank face had obtained the thing that everyone had been longing for but had missed out on. Mo Xiaoyao looked at the timid 10th Prince with a meaningful smile on his lips. He lightly said, "Since the posthumous edict has been read out, the rest has nothing to do with I will leave first." Once again, Prince Ding made it clear that he had no intention of getting involved in the Chu state's imperial court. On the side, the ashen-faced Mo Jingli let out a sigh of relief. He nodded and said, "Prince Ding, take care." Mo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He carried Mo Xiaobao and held Yi Li's hand as he turned to leave the palace. As for what would happen in the palace, it had nothing to do with them. Outside the imperial palace, the streets of the capital were covered with white cloth. The glorious lights of the past were covered under the solemn black and white. When the emperor died, the entire country mourned. Even if the emperor didn't have the support of the people still had to wear mourning clothes, stop singing and dancing, and stop marriage to express their mourning for the emperor. Chapter 598. Naturally, the Prince Ding mansion did not have such strict rules. Only a few conspicuous items had been taken down. The people in the mansion continued to live as usual. Although they were in the capital, they could no longer be considered citizens of the Dechu state. They were like Xiling, Northern Army, and Southern Zhao. They could only be considered guests. There was no need for such strict rules for guests. Returning to the courtyard and sitting down, Mo Xiuyao was in a rare daze. Yi Li sat beside him and asked softly, "Xiuyao, what's wrong? Are you tired?" Mo Xiuyao shook his head and pulled her tightly into his arms. Taking a deep breath, he said, "I'm thinking, did Mo Jingqi die too easily?" According to Mo Xiuyao's thoughts a few years ago, he would not let Mo Jingqi die so easily. He wanted Mo Jingqi to see the things he cared about lose one by one. He wanted to see his country fall into pieces. He even wanted to see the Chu kingdom fall into ruin. If not, he had 1,000 ways to take Mo Jingqi's life when he learned the truth of his father and brother's deaths. Even this time, he had the thought of saving Mo Jingqi and continuing to torture him. But in the end, he gave up on this idea. Yi Li sighed softly. She raised her head to look at Mo Xiuyao and asked, "Do you think Mo Jingqi's death was not tragic enough?" Mo Xiuyao lowered his head and thought. Before Mo Jingqi died, other than not being able to see the country fall apart, he had already lost everything he should have lost. Even if the Dechu state arranged for the 10th prince to succeed the throne, he probably did not have much hope. That was why even death could not compare to his eyes. Thinking about it this way, Mo Jingqi's death was tragic enough. Perhaps, the disappointment now was only because he did not personally act in Mo Jingqi's current tragic state, and was only regretful because he added fuel to the fire. We hate the people we should hate and let them get the punishment they deserve. But I don't want you to let this hatred cloud your heart. There was no point in hating a dead person. If you're still not satisfied, I'll accompany you into the palace to whip Mo Jingqi's corpse, and then cut him into 8 pieces. How about that? Yi Li said softly. Mo Xiuyao smiled. He hugged Yi Li and said with a smile, "I know. I won't think about it anymore." Although it was a pity that he couldn't avenge his brother personally. However, a person like Mo Jingqi was not worthy of dirtying Ai's hands. There's a saying. Heaven's sins can be forgiven, but the sins we bring upon ourselves are the hardest to bear. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It's good that you've thought it through." In the following days, the entire capital was bustling with activity. Mo Jingqi's coffin was still in the imperial palace. The funeral had not yet been carried out, but the members of the imperial family and the courtiers were already in an uproar. The focus of the dispute was none other than 2 things. The first was the succession of the 10th prince. The second was the burial of the Empress Dowager and noble consort Lu. The Empress Dowager was the birth mother of the Prince Li, and noble consort Lu was the birth mother of the Crown Prince. Mo Jingqi's last-minute attack hit the Li Palace and the Lu family's most critical areas. However, compared to the Lu family, the Li Palace's situation was much better. Because Mo Jingli was already the Prince Regent. Even if he was not the emperor, the young emperor still had to listen to him before he personally led an expedition. He still had plenty of time to plan. But the Lu family was different. The crown prince had become the Prince of Qin, and noble consort Lu had to be buried with him. As a result, the Lu family could be said to have no support in the imperial palace. When the time came, Mo Jingli would naturally not let go of this opportunity to strike the Lu family. Even if the Empress Dowager and noble consort Lu had to be buried with him, the blow to Mo Jingli would not be as great as the blow to the Lu family. Because Mo Jingli was already a completely independent prince with real power, it was not very important to him whether he had the Empress Dowager's support or not. At this time, the Zhengde Palace was filled with grief. The empty palace was no longer filled with maids and eunuchs like before. The Empress Dowager sat in the phoenix chair in a daze. There were a few strands of white hair in the originally well-maintained hair on her temples. She looked haggard and had a dazed expression. Mo Jingli sat on the side and drank tea silently. His expression was calm. Even his birth mother, the Empress Dowager, could not see any emotion on his face. Li, what should we do? Qi, is so cruel. I am his birth mother. The Empress Dowager murmured. She had never thought that Mo Jingqi would leave such an imperial edict. She could not use her youngest son's ascension to the throne to become the Empress Dowager. The imperial edict did not even mention that her grandson would become the Empress Dowager after ascending to the throne. She became the first and perhaps the only Empress Dowager in history to be buried with her own son. The glory and wealth of the past seemed to have become a thing of the past. She could not even keep her life. Since she had become the Empress Dowager, she had never been so panicked. Even when Mo Jingli had started a rebellion in the south, she had not been so panicked. Why was everything different from what she had imagined? Mo Jingli put down the teacup and looked calmly at the Empress Dowager. He said, Muhu, this is Imperial Brother's posthumous edict. The Empress Dowager stilled. It took her a while to realize what Mo Jingli meant. In some ways, a posthumous edict was more effective than an imperial edict. Even though it was said that a monarch did not speak lightly, as long as Mo Jingqi was alive, she would have a chance to make him take back his edict. But now, Mo Jingqi was dead. The last imperial edict he had left behind was a posthumous edict. In order to show respect to the previous emperor, the posthumous edict of the previous emperor could not be easily overturned even if a new emperor ascended to the throne. Mo Jingli was telling her that he had no way. No way. I don't believe it. The Empress Dowager stumbled over and grabbed Mo Jingli's hand. She said, I am your mother. Save Muhu. Muhu doesn't want to die. I know you have a way. Mo Jingli shook his head lightly. He said, Muhu, please forgive me. I have no way. The Empress Dowager stumbled back 2 steps and almost tripped over the chair behind her. She fell into the chair powerlessly and looked at Mo Jingli with eyes full of disbelief. You really don't want to care about Muhu? Don't forget, if Muhu didn't persuade His Majesty for you, why would His Majesty order Muhu to be buried with him? The Empress Dowager also understood that this was her son's revenge on her. Revenge on her for siding with Mo Jingli when he was poisoned and persuading him to pass the throne to Mo Jingli when he was dying. All of this was because of him. Did Muhu do it? Mo Jingli said coldly. What? The Empress Dowager was shocked. The throne. Muhu, you heard brother's edict. Pass the throne to the 10th prince. A kid that I haven't even seen and doesn't know anything. Is this the result of you persuading brother behind the scenes? Mo Jingli stood up and said in a low voice. The more he spoke, the angrier he became. Mo Jingli's voice gradually became louder. Not only the matter of the throne, but also the matter of my son. You did nothing. Now Mo Jingqi is dead. Muhu, tell Muhu where can I find my son? The Empress Dowager frowned and said, even if Qi lied to you, how many concubines do you want to have in the future? Mo Jingli's face was livid. Of course, he knew that the Empress Dowager couldn't say that he couldn't have children anymore. In the past few months, he had secretly seen many famous doctors. Mo Jingqi didn't lie to him about this matter. He had been poisoned with a sterilization drug secretly passed down in the palace many years ago. There was no cure. So, no one knew how important that child was to him. In short, I can't do anything about this matter. Muhu, take care of yourself. Mo Jingli said. He brushed his slightly wrinkled clothes and was about to turn and leave. No. The Empress Dowager rushed over and grabbed Mo Jingli's clothes. She cried and begged, save Muhu. Muhu doesn't want to die. I'm your mother, Li. Mo Jingli looked down at the Empress Dowager who was in a mess in front of him. He indifferently raised his hand and pulled away her hand that grabbed his clothes. He said in a low voice, Muhu, in the imperial family, even you don't believe in the kinship, right? Otherwise, what did you do to imperial brother in the past? The Empress Dowager knelt on the ground and watched Mo Jingli leave without any hesitation. Finally, she couldn't help but cry out loud. She also loudly cursed, unfilial son. Mo Jingli, you unfilial son. Aijia is your mother, Aijia won't let you go even if Aijia goes to the Yellow Springs. No. I don't want to die. I am the Empress Dowager of Dechu State. The Empress Dowager cried and cursed. Finally, she cursed until she cried on the ground. She finally remembered what her eldest son's gaze meant when she went to see him a few days ago. When she persuaded him to give the throne to Mo Jingli, she finally remembered the meaning behind his gaze. Unfortunately, it was too late. Aijia is the Empress Dowager, Aijia won't die. Outside Zhengde Palace, the Empress Dowager's cries were already shut behind the palace doors. Mo Jingli turned his head to look at the tightly shut palace doors. His face was dark and the expression in his eyes kept changing. In the end, it returned to nothingness. Prince, Empress Dowager. The strategist beside him suggested in a low voice. Actually, with Prince Li and the Empress Dowager's status, it wasn't impossible for them to protect the Empress Dowager. Mo Jingli said indifferently, no need. Have people pay attention to the Lu family. Don't let the Lu family and noble consort Lu do anything. The crown prince, the Prince of Qin's birth mother must die. The strategist's heart trembled. So it was because of this. If they wanted to protect the Empress Dowager, then the Lu family would definitely use this to request that noble consort Lu not be buried with the Empress Dowager. And Prince Li clearly didn't want noble consort Lu to continue living. In order to attack the Lu family, Prince Li actually, this humble subject understands. Chapter 599. In noble consort Lu's palace, although she didn't go to listen to the posthumous edict, the news still reached her ears very quickly. When she heard the news from the eunuch, noble consort Lu was sitting in the small garden in her palace, looking at the brilliant pear blossoms in the courtyard. A slightly cold breeze came out, sprinkling the ground like white snow. Although wrapped in the white fox cloak, noble consort Lu couldn't help but shiver. Get out! Noble consort Lu said coldly. The eunuch naturally didn't dare to say anything and scrambled out. He was afraid that before noble consort Lu was buried with him, his head would fall to the ground first. After telling the people around her to leave, noble consort Lu looked up at the snow-white tree in front of her. Pear blossoms were her favorite flowers. In her opinion, the snow-white pear blossoms were much more beautiful and noble than peonies, peach blossoms, orchids, and plum blossoms. There were no pear trees in the original pears were very far away. The palace had always thought that pears were ominous. However, after she entered the palace, Missouri Jingqi planted several pear trees in the small garden in her palace to please her, just to make her smile. And now, she was buried with him. She knew that Mo Jingqi had always been cruel and merciless, but she never thought that he would use this on her one day. Sure enough, even if he died, he wanted her to be buried with him. Noble consort. His Highness, the Duke of Qin and the Prime Minister ask for an audience, the palace maid outside the door reported with trepidation. Noble consort Lu stood up, gathered the white fox cloak around her, and said, let them in. Before long, the Crown Prince, Mo Xiaoyun, who had been demoted to the Duke of Qin, and Prime Minister Lu appeared together and walked into the main hall. Following them were the 5th prince, who was 2 years younger than the Crown Prince, and the 14-year-old Princess Shen Ning. The 5th prince and Princess Shen Ning cried as soon as they saw noble consort Lu. Mother! Sob! Mother! Noble consort Lu wasn't a patient person to begin with. Right now, she was very upset. When she heard the crying, the anger in her heart surged. She said harshly, "Why are you crying? I'm not dead yet." The fifth prince and Princess Zhenning were originally worried about their mother. When they heard Imperial Father's posthumous edict to bury their mother, they eagerly followed the King of Qin and Prime Minister Lu over. Although noble consort Lu had always been indifferent to them, she was still their biological mother. Moreover, they had always admired this extremely beautiful mother of theirs. However, he did not expect to be scolded harshly the moment they met. The fifth prince's cries were immediately stifled in his chest, and his face flushed red due to the difficulty in breathing. Princess Zhenning also bit the corner of her lips, stubbornly not making a sound. Mo Xiaoyun was only 12 years old, but because he was the eldest son of noble concubine Lu, Prime Minister Lu had paid special attention to him. Naturally, she was much calmer than her sister and brother. The crown prince was originally the rightful heir to the throne. However, because of an imperial edict from his father before his death, he had to submit to someone else. At this time, he could still speak with a calm expression. It was enough to show that the Lu family had put in a lot of effort in cultivating him. Mo Xiaoyun frowned and said, "Imperial mother, second sister and fifth brother are worried about you." Noble consort Lu snorted and said indifferently, "What's the use of worrying? What can crying and wailing solve?" Mo Xiaoyun was silent. In fact, he did not have deep feelings for his mother. He was not second sister and fifth brother, who only had blind admiration and longing for his mother. He clearly understood that in his mother's eyes, he and his sister should not exist, and he was just a tool that already existed. "Your Highness." Prime Minister Lu frowned and said in a deep voice. Speaking of this daughter, Prime Minister Lu only felt a great headache. Since she saw Mo Xiuyao when she was a child, this was the first time that her heart seemed to be attached to Mo Xiuyao. She had not given up for so many years. Not only was she cold and indifferent to the emperor, but she was also indifferent to her own children. If it were not for Mo Xiuyao, she would not even consider fighting for the position of crown prince for the king of Qin, let alone for her family. This was really the evil debt of her previous life. Prime Minister Lu thought that he was a ruthless and cold-blooded person. As an official, many people had died unjustly in his hands. However, no matter how cold-blooded he was, he still cared about his family and children. As for his daughter, except for Mo Xiuyao, she could abandon all the other families, her husband, and her parents. Noble consort Lu still had some respect for her father, Prime Minister Lu. Hearing her father's disapproving tone, noble consort Lu frowned and said indifferently, "Father, why are you here?" Prime Minister Lu said anxiously, "Why am I here? How can I not be here? You have heard the edict of the late emperor. Why don't you think of a way? Do you really want to be buried with the late emperor?" Speaking of Mo Jingqi, noble consort Lu curled her lower lip corner in disgust. At first, she believed that Mo Jingqi cared about her, but now she didn't believe it at all. That man, he wanted to drag her to die with him after he died. Even if she had to die, she would never be buried in the same tomb as him. "Father, don't worry. I know what to do." Prime Minister Lu was stunned. "You have a way." The emperor also ordered the Empress Dowager to be buried with the late emperor, and King Li didn't raise any objection. At that time, King Li will keep a close eye on you, and you may not be able to get away safely. Hearing Mo Jingli's name, noble consort Lu's face darkened. She gritted her teeth and said, "Mo Jingli." He ruined I's plan again. Prime Minister Lu sighed helplessly and said, "What's done is done. There's nothing we can do. The 10th prince will ascend the throne in a few days." "No." Noble consort Lu said coldly. "What's done is done. What else can we do?" Prime Minister Lu frowned and said. Noble consort Lu raised her chin and said coldly, "Since the 6th prince can be abolished, the 10th prince can be eliminated as well. The crown prince must be the one to ascend the throne. As long as the crown prince ascends the throne, the edict can be abolished, and I don't have to be buried with him. Prime Minister Lu was shocked and angry. He stared at noble consort Lu and said, "You must be dreaming." At this time, not only King Li, but also great elder princess, the Empress, Duke Hua, and even Prince Ding are keeping an eye on the 10th prince. It's very difficult for us to kill him. Once it's discovered, do you think King Qin still has a chance to ascend the throne? At that time, the Lu family will be buried with him, and we will only work for others. Noble consort Lu smiled and said, "Father, do you think we're the only ones who want the 10th prince to die? King Li is no less scheming than us. I heard some interesting news. It said that King Li asked the emperor where his son was before he died." Prime Minister Lu was stunned. He certainly heard what King Li said at that time, but he cared more about the edict in the empress's hand at that time. After the edict was issued, they were shocked by the news of the edict. Naturally, they didn't have time to care about this problem. Noble consort Lu smiled and said, "Father, do you still remember that Mo Jingli and his family kicked their son to death 2 months ago?" Of course, Prime Minister Lu remembered. Although the Li mansion covered it up tightly, the Lu family and the Li mansion were political enemies. How could they not know such a big thing? Stroking his beard, Prime Minister Lu narrowed his eyes and said, "You mean?" Noble consort Lu smiled and said, "When Yi Ying was pregnant, she was imprisoned by the emperor. We only know that she gave birth to a son, but no one has seen the son. Of course, the emperor said it was not the son. I'm afraid that the child in the Li mansion is not King Li's son at all. The emperor has always been suspicious, and King Li was the one who rebelled. How could the emperor not guard against him?" Chapter 600. Your Highness, do you know where the child is? Prime Minister Lu was overjoyed. Now, except for Yi Ying's son, King Li didn't have any other children. He didn't even have the news of his concubine's pregnancy. There had been some rumors in the capital. If that was true, then the value of this child was indeed beyond everyone's expectation. Noble concubine Lu shook her head and said, "I don't know. The emperor didn't tell anyone where the child is." Prime Minister Lu was a little disappointed, but noble concubine Lu said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. We haven't seen the child, and King Li hasn't seen the child either. As long as my father makes the right arrangements." Your Highness, you are right. I understand. Prime Minister Lu thought for a second and immediately understood what noble concubine Lu meant. He responded with a smile. No matter what was going on inside and outside the palace, the Prince Ding mansion was still peaceful and quiet. Until this evening, a handsome man in red knocked on the closed door of the Prince Ding mansion. In the study, Mo Xiaoyao lazily looked at Feng Zhiyao, who was covered in dust, and said blandly, "I don't remember asking you to come to the capital, Feng Zhiyao." Feng Zhiyao stood against the wall by the door, and gave him a tired smile. After the new year, Feng Zhiyao's handsome face, which used to be frivolous, became a little calmer and a little more down and out. This kind of feeling shouldn't exist on Prince Ding's right-hand man, young Master Feng San, who was not the most powerful person in the northwest, but no one dared to ignore him. At this moment, he frowned slightly because of tiredness and worry, which made people unable to blame him. Yi Li quietly pulled Mo Xiaoyao's clothes, indicating that he shouldn't blame Feng Zhiyao too much. Mo Xiaoyao snorted with dissatisfaction, looked at Feng Zhiyao and said, "Tell me, what's the matter? If you want to say that there's nothing wrong and that you just came to the Chu capital from the northwest because you're worried, I will immediately ask someone to pack you up and throw you back." Feng Zhiyao had grown up with him. Naturally, he could tell when he was really angry and when he was just trying to scare people. Smiling gratefully at Yi Li, Feng Zhiyao walked to a chair at the side and sat down. "Young Master Qingchen wants me to pass a message to Prince. The West Hill and Nanzhao haven't started fighting yet." In fact, this was a favor that Su Qingchen owed to Feng Zhiyao. Originally, this kind of news naturally didn't require Feng Zhiyao's status to send a letter from thousands of miles away. Moreover, it wasn't that Su Qingchen couldn't handle this kind of matter. However, Feng Zhiyao's condition had seriously affected his work efficiency. Young Master Qingchen was extremely intelligent. He naturally understood that there must be something in the capital that made him uneasy. Only then did he casually assign him some tasks so that he could return to the capital. Hearing this, Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow in surprise. Su Qingchen's plans rarely went wrong. However, he quickly understood. Although Mo Jingqi's death wasn't unexpected, the chaos after Mo Jingqi's death was definitely unexpected. Especially Mo Jingqi's decree of self-guilt and the arrangements for the Prince Ding mansion before his death were even more unexpected. After receiving this news, Genom of Gojoseon could indeed give up on attacking Nanzhao. After all, Nanzhao was a small country that was content with a corner of the country. Whether or not they could take it was insignificant compared to the prosperous De Chu state in the Central Plains. Have there been any changes in West Hill recently? Mo Xiuyao asked. Feng Zhiyao said, Genom of Gojoseon has already secretly moved troops closer to the De Chu state's border. Young Master Qingchen speculated, as long as the news of Mo Jingqi's death spreads, the Xiling army will once again attack the De Chu state. In addition, the northern tribes also seem to have this plan. What did young Master Qingchen say? Young Master Qingchen said that if Prince finished dealing with the matters in the capital, please return as soon as possible. If finished. Mo Xiuyao tilted his head and looked at Yi Li with a smile. It seems that Big Brother isn't in a hurry for us to return. Then let's stay for a while. If they finished dealing with the matters, they would return as soon as possible. If they didn't, they wouldn't return. Since Su Qingchen dared to say this, it meant that he didn't care about Lei Zhenting's actions. Since that was the case, and young Master Qingchen was guarding the northwest, why not take a look at the De Chu state and see what benefits they could get? Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and didn't care that Mo Xiuyao had misinterpreted Su Qingchen's words. In any case, he had conveyed the original words without missing a word. As for how Prince wanted to interpret it, that was none of his business. Yi Li smiled at Feng Zhiyao and said, since that's the case, Feng San can stay in the palace for now. Although Feng Zhiyao had a home, he had already moved out a few years ago. When the Mahist army and the De Chu state broke off relations, the Feng family publicly announced that they had expelled Feng Zhiyao from the family and cut off all relations. Feng Zhiyao's residence in the capital had been empty for many years. Who didn't know that young Master Feng San was Prince Ding's confidant? Feng Zhiyao nodded and said, many thanks to Wang Fei. Prince Wang Fei. Feng Zhiyao looked at Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao. In the end, he couldn't bear it. He had hurried back to the capital for this matter. He couldn't wait a moment longer. Yi Li couldn't help but cover her mouth and smile when she saw the handsome young Master Feng San blushing in front of everyone. She looked at Feng Zhiyao and said seriously, don't worry. She is the empress of a country and has the support of the Hua family. No matter who ascends the throne, they will only be respectful to her. Feng Zhiyao's expression froze. He hesitated a moment and said, I want to see her. Wang Fei, please grant me this wish. Yi Li tilted her head to look at Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow and said, let Li decide such a small matter. Yi Li thought and then said to Feng Zhiyao, right now, the palace is under martial law. Don't be impatient. I will have someone arrange it, but I need to get her agreement first. Yi Li knew what Feng Zhiyao wanted to do, but if the empress didn't agree, Feng Zhiyao's rash visit would only add to the troubles of both sides. Yi Li wasn't sure if the empress had feelings for Feng Zhiyao, or if the feelings were enough for her to give up her responsibility and status. Feng Zhiyao hesitated and wanted to refute, but seeing Yi Li's serious expression, he could only nod, many thanks, Wang Fei. As though she saw Feng Zhiyao's unwillingness, Yi Li sighed softly and said, it is hard to say who is right and who is wrong in matters of the heart. We all know that you care for her, but If she doesn't need your care, then your thoughts right now are not helping her, but creating trouble for her. Do you understand? Feng Zhiyao was silent. Maybe in his heart, he didn't believe that the Empress didn't need his help at all. But, she was the mother of the world. Even if she didn't have any feelings for Mo Jingqi, it didn't change the fact that she was the future Empress Dowager of Dechu State. Even if Mo Jingli ascended the throne, he could only be respectful to this imperial sister-in-law. Right now, the 10th prince who was about to ascend the throne was only 7 years old. This was the time when he needed someone to help him. Would she go with him? In this moment, Feng Zhiyao suddenly became fearful and uneasy. Seeing his rare expression, Yili sighed softly in her heart. Love was the most torturous thing. Feng Zhiyao was a free and easy person with extraordinary achievements. She should have lived a carefree and unrestrained life, but unfortunately, she fell for the word of love. How many years had he been obsessed? If Han Mingyue's obsession with Su Zuodi was hateful, then Feng Zhiyao's deep feelings for the Empress could only make people feel pity and helpless. Don't think too much. Yili laughed softly. Feng Zhiyao forced a smile and said, "Thank you, Princess, for your advice." Princess, second young Master Leng and Madame Leng are here. Zhuo Jing reported from outside the door. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, "What are they doing here at this time?" Leng Haoyu's laughter came from outside the door. With the emperor's death, many businesses were forced to close. Isn't this subordinate idle? Leng Haoyu had many businesses under his name, including brothels, taverns, gambling houses and so on. With the emperor's death, the world mourned. Naturally, these businesses could no longer be done. So, Leng Haoyu brought his son and wife to the Prince Ding mansion to visit. He pulled Murong Ting into the study and happened to see Feng Zhiyao sitting on the side. Leng Haoyu smiled and said, "Oh. Isn't this young Master Feng San? I haven't seen you for a long time. You don't look very good. Wasn't that so?" Feng Zhiyao rushed all the way here and didn't rest. He went straight into the study to discuss matters. When he was in good spirits, he looked fine. Now that he was relaxed, even his red clothes looked a little dull. Although Leng Haoyu always liked to argue with Feng Zhiyao, he still had a sense of propriety and didn't poke at his sore spot. He sat down and looked at Feng Zhiyao and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, she's fine. At this time, no one dares to neglect her." Before the new emperor was elected, the previous emperor had passed away. The Empress Dowager, noble consort Lu, was buried with the emperor. In the palace, the empress had the final say. At this time, no one with eyes would make the empress uncomfortable. Feng Zhiyao nodded and said with a faint smile, "Thank you." Leng Haoyu curled his lips and didn't say anything. He didn't have any opinions about the empress, but seeing Feng Zhiyao's more than 10 years of bitter love, sometimes he couldn't help but want to fight for justice for his good friend. But thinking about how much time and effort he had spent chasing his wife, he could only sigh that Feng Zhiyao was more unlucky than him. Chapter 601. Leng Haoyu and Murong Ting's sudden visit was naturally not just for a visit. After everyone sat down, Leng Haoyu frowned and said, "Our people sent out news that the Lu family seems to know about Mo Jingli's son." Feng Zhiyao had just returned to Chu capital, so he naturally did not know what had happened in Chu capital in the past 2 months. He asked in confusion, "Mo Jingli's son? Is it the one Yiying gave birth to? Was he kidnapped?" Leng Haoyu clapped his hands and smiled, "Your news is really too slow. Mo Jingli had just become the regent some time ago. When he returned to his residence, he kicked his own son to death. Although this news was suppressed and not spread, most of the nobles in the capital knew about it." Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. He was not an idiot and naturally understood immediately. He smiled and said, "So Mo Jingli raised someone else's son for nothing? What about now? His son is in the hands of the Lu family." what do you think? Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li and asked. Yi Li frowned and thought for a while. I don't think it's very likely. Mo Jingqi is very careful and suspicious. He never even trusts the people around him. Mo Jingli spent so much time and effort and still couldn't find any clues. This proves that Mo Jingqi dealt with it very cleanly back then. It doesn't make sense that the Lu family could find it. Also, the timing is a bit too coincidental. Mo Jingqi had just passed away, and the new emperor had not ascended the throne yet, but the Lu family had already thrown out the news of the Li Palace's only son. It really made people think too much. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Leng Haoyu. Leng Haoyu shrugged and said, they also didn't get any specific news. It's just that the Lu family has been secretly moving a lot recently. They can only vaguely know that it's related to Mo Jingli's son. But it still needs time to confirm whether that child is Mo Jingli's son. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and smiled, there's no need to investigate. It's a waste of time. Leng Haoyu looked at him in confusion. Mo Xiaoyao asked, does it matter if it is or not? Hearing this, everyone was startled. Wasn't it? They did not intend to get involved in these matters. Then whether that child was Mo Jingli's son or not had no meaning to them. Mo Xiaoyao stood up and looked at Leng Haoyu with a smile. If you have the time, why don't you investigate the matters of the northern region? Your business in the capital has also closed. Why don't you make a trip there? There was a battle in the city was in the capital city pass. Although there were secret guards protecting him, he was still worried about Leng Huai's secret guard. I'll go too, Murong Ting quickly said. Although to Haoyu's to, was to, Haodo's family to the family to him to the family to be, to Mo Xiaoyao naturally could not control Murong Ting. This was Leng Haoyu's family background. Leng Haoyu said hesitantly, Haoyu is in the middle of a battle now. It's too dangerous. Murong Ting snorted, do you think I haven't seen a battlefield? She had grown up at the border with her father since she was young. Furthermore, she had participated in the defense of Yonglin City back then, okay? Junhan has no one to take care of her in the capital. Do you have the heart? Leng Haoyu continued to persuade. Murong Ting frowned. This was a problem. Her son had never left her side since he was born. Glancing at Yi Li sitting on the side, Murong Ting's eyes lit up. She looked at Yi Li eagerly. Yi Li covered her mouth and smiled, as long as you're not afraid of Junhan being bullied by Chen, just send her over. Taking care of one child was the same as taking care of two children. Besides, although Mo Xiaobao was occasionally clingy, he was actually quite good at taking care of himself. They did not need to spend much effort on him. However, for some reason, Mo Xiaobao thought that Leng Junhan was a soft little bun that could be bullied. Every time they met, it was either pinching or caressing. Yi Li suspected that Mo Xiaobao had transferred all his resentment from being bullied by his father to Leng Junhan. Every time she saw the white and soft little Junhan being bullied by Mo Xiaobao until tears welled up in her eyes but stubbornly refused to fall down, Yi Li's heart ached. However, Leng Junhan thought that Mo Xiaobao was a good brother. After being bullied, she would forget about it. The next time they met, she would still call brother Yuchen intimately. No wonder Mo Xiaobao called him little dazed Leng. Even Leng Haoyu, the father, could not help but cover his face when he saw that adorable look. How many sins did he commit to have such a dazed son? It's okay. Junhan has been spoiled too much by us. I don't know who she got her soft personality from. She can be placed in your house to help me train her well. Murong Ting waved her hand generously. The grand seat had made up her mind. As a slave to his wife, Leng Haoyu could only obey. However, he still had a bit of awareness as a father. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao and warned, don't let the little heir bully my son too much. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. Was this something he could control? He was Prince Ding, not a nanny to take care of a child. Leng Er, you don't think that I asked you to visit your family, do you? Looking at Leng Haoyu's conflicted look, Mo Xiaoyao said lightly. As an outstanding and capable subordinate, shouldn't he try to figure out every action and decision of his superior? Leng Haoyu was rushing to visit his family. Why was he so happy and worried that he could not bear to part with the child at home? Leng Haoyu lowered his head helplessly. He knew that it would not be so easy. I respectfully listened to Prince's instructions. Mo Xiaoyao curled his lips slightly and said, there's no need for instructions. If the Northern Army takes a step into Redbud Pass within half a year, you don't have to come back. Go hang yourself in the southeast. In addition, I am a person who appreciates talent. Leng Haoyu's expression changed. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao with some joy. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but did not say anything. Leng Haoyu raised his voice and said, Prince, don't worry. This subordinate will live up to Prince's painstaking efforts. Go. Your son doesn't have to worry. If you can't make it back in time, I can bring him back to the northwest. It just so happens that Mr. Qing Yun is free now. He can teach you a thing or two. Leng Haoyu and Murong Ting were delighted. Ever since they had a child, they had always been stationed in the capital. In fact, this did not benefit Leng Haoyu's many subordinates, but he was worried about letting Murong Ting take care of the child alone. If Leng Junhan was brought back to the northwest, there was naturally no need to worry about her safety. Being taught by Mr. Qing Yun personally was definitely a benefit that others could not ask for. Second young Master Leng obviously attributed young Master Mo's cleverness and wisdom to Mr. Qing Yun's teaching. Thank you, Prince. The next morning, Leng Haoyu and Murong Ting secretly went to Redbud Pass. The two of them were not valued in the Leng family, and not many people paid attention to them in the capital. Therefore, they did not attract much attention. Leng Junhan was sent to the Prince Ding mansion that night. Although she was a little hurt about leaving her parents, the 4-year-old baby was only a little. But after hearing the news that she would live with brother Xiaobao in the future, little Days Leng quickly forgot about her parents' departure and said that she would sleep with brother Yuchen in the future. Looking at his son's rare expression as if he had swallowed a fly, Prince Ding happily agreed to little Leng's request. He also signaled little Treasure Mo to take good care of his little brother and not let him suffer the slightest grievance. Chapter 602. Thus, the days in the Prince Ding mansion slowly passed as Mo Xiaobao and Leng Xiaobao chased each other around, bullied each other, and laughed foolishly. As for the news that came from time to time, such as the attempted assassination of the 10th prince before he ascended the throne, the Empress Dowager who did not want to be buried with him, and the secret clashes between the Lu family and the Li palace, these were all ignored by the people in the Prince Ding mansion. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the new emperor's ascension. Mo Jingqi's coffin had been moved to a side hall on the western side of the imperial city. Perhaps because Mo Jingqi never thought that he would die so early, Mo Jingqi's imperial mausoleum had not been completed yet. The time needed to build the imperial mausoleums could not be completed in a day. Therefore, Mo Jingqi could not be buried in a short period of time, and could only be placed in a palace for the time being. After the imperial mausoleum was completed, Zi Gong would be sent to the imperial mausoleum. The ascension of a new emperor in the Dechu state was always met with congratulations from all sides. Even when Mo Jingqi ascended the throne, the regent Mo Lufang had already passed away. The Dechu state still had Mo Xiuwen supporting it, and the famous young general Mo Xiuyao. The entire Dechu state was still relatively stable and strong. The surrounding countries, including Xiling, naturally sent envoys to congratulate him. This time, other than Nanzhao and the surrounding small countries sending envoys, there was no news from the neighboring Xiling and northern tribes. A 7-year-old emperor, and there were two opposing factions in court, each with their own thoughts. The Prince Ding mansion had already left the Dechu state. The two powerful countries, Xiling and northern tribes, did have the right to ignore them. Moreover, they were not in the mood to congratulate the new emperor of the Dechu state. They were coveting the fat piece of meat that was the Dechu state. The enthronement ceremony of the 10th prince was scheduled to be held on March 12, which was not a bad day. The Prince Ding mansion naturally received an invitation early on. A few days before the coronation, Yili was invited to the palace by the empress. This was not the first time Yili had seen the 10th prince. This child, who had originally lived like a shadow in a corner of the imperial palace, had suddenly been pushed to the most eye-catching place after Imo Jingqi's incident. In the past half a month, he had suffered a lot of fright. When Yili saw him, he was sleeping in his biological mother's arms. Just by looking at his sallow and emaciated face, one could tell that he had not been living well these days. Hearing Yili's footsteps, the 10th prince immediately opened his eyes. His blank eyes were filled with horror and fear. He whimpered and was about to cry. His birth mother hurriedly covered his mouth in panic and looked at Yili and the empress at a loss. The empress frowned and sighed helplessly, quickly let go of him. Princess Ding will not bicker with a child. The woman, who was wearing gorgeous clothes and had an ordinary appearance, finally carefully let go of the hand covering the 10th prince's mouth. She looked uneasily at Yili before softly coaxing the 10th prince in her arms. The 10th prince cried for a while and seemed to be tired. He then fell into a deep sleep again. The empress wanted someone to take him to rest, but was worried that she would wake him up again. Yili walked over and pressed on the 10th prince's acupuncture points a few times before saying in a low voice, "Take him to rest. Be careful, he won't wake up." "Many thanks." "Many thanks to Princess Ding." He thanked Yili with trepidation before taking the 10th prince into the back hall to rest. Seeing them leave, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked the empress, "What happened?" The empress smiled bitterly. "What else could it be? This child. At first, I only thought that the 6th prince was arrogant and overbearing. He was spoiled and could not be a ruler. But this 10th prince. I am afraid that he is more troublesome than the 6th prince. It is also difficult for this child. He has only seen his father a few times in his life. His birth mother is also not someone who can teach him. He has been frightened a lot these days and has not been able to sleep well. Now, not to mention anything else, I am afraid that he will not even be able to cope on the day of the ascension." Seeing the empress' tired expression, Yili could only sigh. The 10th prince's birth mother was only a palace maid that Imo Jingqi had taken care of. She was originally from a poor peasant family and naturally could not teach the 10th prince anything. Although it was thought that because the 10th prince was about to ascend the throne, the people in the palace respectfully called her Empress Dowager. But that gorgeous dress could not change a person's temperament and ability. Wearing the gorgeous Empress Dowager's phoenix robe, it only made the small and unremarkable woman even more insignificant and uneasy. Right now, King Li and the officials of Hua country were supporting the outside matters, but the empress had to take care of the matters in the palace alone. If something happened to the new emperor at this time, even if the empress was not blamed, she would not be able to escape the crime of failing to protect the young emperor. No wonder the empress was so tired. Seeing the empress like this, Yili almost could not bear to talk about Feng Jiao. The empress saw that Yili was distracted and said with a smile, "Do you have something to say? We are not outsiders, just say it." Yili looked up and said in a low voice to her, "Feng San has returned." The empress stilled and looked down at the white jade bracelet on her wrist in a daze. Yili did not rush her and quietly sat at the side to drink tea. After a while, the empress came back to her senses and smiled apologetically at Yili, saying, "I have let you see a joke, for a while. Isn't he fine in the northwest? Why did he come back at this time?" Yili looked calmly at the empress and did not speak. The faint smile on the empress' face also gradually disappeared. Looking helplessly at Yili, she said, "For Wang Fei to come and tell me this, it must be Wang Fei also knows about the matters of the past. Yili nodded and said softly, the matters of the past are not your fault. Feng San's unwillingness to give up is his obsession, and it is also not your fault. If your highness does not care, I will tell him not to disturb your highness. But if your highness is not indifferent, why not give each other a chance? Chance? The empress smiled bitterly and shook her head at Yili, saying, many thanks to Wang Fei. I know that Wang Fei is not someone who likes to meddle in other people's business. It is not easy for you to tell me so much. Wang Fei, please tell him. I only treat him like Xiuyao, a younger brother that I watched grow up. There is nothing else. Yili frowned and said, he wants to see your highness. Originally, he wanted to enter the palace as soon as he returned to the capital, but the prince and I persuaded him not to. But if I bring back such an answer, I'm afraid that he will not be convinced no matter what. When the time comes, he still wants to see your highness. The empress shook her head and said, there is no need to meet. Right now, the palace is heavily guarded and the new emperor is about to ascend the throne. I do not have the mind to think about these things. Wang Fei, tell him not to enter the palace. I do not have the time. Yili was silent. Not having the time was indeed a very good excuse to refuse. When a person did not even have the time to see you, it was naturally enough to show that they did not care about you. No matter from which aspect, the empress was an extremely intelligent woman. What plans does your highness have in the future? Yili asked with a frown. The empress was puzzled and looked at Yili. Yili pursed her lips and said with a faint smile, if your highness wants me to persuade Feng San, you have to give me a reason. At least, you have to let him know that without him, your highness can live very well, or even better than with him, right? The empress understood and said in a low voice, when the new emperor ascends the throne, I will become the empress dowager of the Dechu state. Is that not enough? Maybe it is. Yili sighed and said. The two were speechless for a while. There was a commotion outside the door, impudent. Have the empress come out. Aijia wants to see her. Empress Dowager, the empress is currently meeting with Princess Ding. Empress Dowager, please wait a moment. The palace maid outside the door advised. Impudent. Aijia is the Empress Dowager. Do I need to wait to see her? The one surnamed Feng, come out for Aijia. Yili frowned and said in confusion, didn't they say they were going to be buried together? Why are they still making a fuss? Is noble consort Lu still here? The empress said with a faint smile, the Lu family and the king of Qin don't agree with noble consort Lu being buried together. The key is that the prince regent's intention is also wavering. Since noble consort Lu is still alive, the empress dowager naturally can't be moved for the time being. Those families are still arguing with the court officials and those scholars. I heard that there is a saying that they will be buried together with the emperor when he is buried. It doesn't count as going against the posthumous edict. That has nothing to do with the Empress Dowager, right? The late emperor has been buried for almost 20 years. Who knows what they are thinking? For this kind of thing, anything I say is wrong. Just let them argue among themselves. Hearing the noise outside getting louder and louder, the 10th prince seemed to have been woken up again and began to sob. The empress frowned and said loudly, invite the Empress Dowager in. It was quiet outside the door for a while. A moment later, the Empress Dowager led her people into the main hall. Looking at the Empress Dowager in front of her, Yili couldn't help but be shocked. She remembered that the first time she saw the Empress Dowager was in Zhengde Palace. The Empress Dowager was a dignified and noble mother of the country. But now, the Empress Dowager seemed to have lost her dignified and noble royal majesty overnight. White hair, frowning eyebrows that couldn't be covered by makeup, and the ferociousness in her eyes. She didn't look like the Empress Dowager of a country, but more like a fighting beast trapped in a cage. Chapter 603. Imperial Mother, what is the matter? Seeing the Empress Dowager come in with a group of people, the Empress frowned and asked. The Empress Dowager fiercely stared at the Empress and snapped, "Where is the 10th prince?" The Empress calmly looked at the Empress Dowager and asked, "The 10th prince? Imperial Mother, why are you asking this?" The Empress Dowager coldly snorted, "The 10th prince is about to ascend the throne. Aijia is his imperial grandmother. If I don't teach him, who else can?" The Empress calmly refused, "The new emperor has his tutor and court officials to teach him. Imperial Mother doesn't need to worry. Besides, the new emperor hasn't been registered yet. Imperial Mother is going to be buried with Imperial Father. It's not appropriate to meet." It was clear that the Empress Dowager had really angered the Empress these days. Otherwise, the Empress would never have said such a thing with her temperament. The Empress Dowager was so angry that her face turned green and white. Her hand trembled as she pointed at the Empress, "Presumptuous. Hua Shi, even though you are the Empress, you didn't leave behind a prince for the Emperor. Aijia thinks that the person who should be buried with him is you." The Empress Dowager was very jealous of the leisurely and graceful Empress in front of her. Even though the Empress didn't have a son, and even her only daughter was missing. But on the surface, no one could touch her. Not only because she was the daughter of the Hua family, but also because she was the Emperor's first wife. She was the D-Empress of the Dechu state and the D-Mother of all the princes and princesses. No matter which prince ascended the throne, they had to respect her as the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager had to admit that even though she looked down on and hated noble consort Lu, she was the same as noble consort Lu. No matter how favored she was, no matter how many children she had. Without the title of the D-wife, they didn't even have the right to refuse to be buried with the Emperor. The Empress lowered her eyes and calmly said, "It's a pity that the Emperor didn't want I to accompany him before he died. Imperial Mother, Chinchia thinks that you should go back to the palace to rest. There are many things that Chinchia can't decide. Even the new Emperor can't decide at this time. If Imperial Mother has something to say, it's better to go find Li Wang." The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth. Of course she wanted to find Mo Jingli. However, ever since the Emperor passed away, Mo Jingli had never entered the palace to pay his respects to her. Even when he occasionally entered the palace, it was to visit the Empress and discuss the ascension of the new Emperor. By the time she received the news and rushed over, Mo Jingli had already left the palace. Now that the Empress Dowager's power had been stripped clean, it was very inconvenient for her to do anything. The Empress Dowager knew that Mo Jingli was determined to leave her alone. "Empress, what are you talking about? I just came to see the 10th prince." The Empress Dowager held back her anger and gritted her teeth. Since Imperial Grandmother wanted to see her grandson, she naturally had to let her see him. It just so happened that the 10th prince had also woken up. The Empress could only send someone to invite the 10th prince out. After the Empress gave in, the Empress Dowager sat down with satisfaction and drank the tea brought by the palace maid. Only then did he have the time to see Yili sitting beside him. The Empress Dowager didn't have a good impression of Yili. It wasn't that she had any opinions about Yili. It was that they had different standpoints from the start. And now, her life was hanging by a thread, while Yili had become Prince Ding's only wife. Princess Ding's name was as famous as Prince Ding's. How could the Empress Dowager, who had always boasted of being a heroine, feel comfortable? "Princess Ding," the Empress Dowager said with a frown. "Yes. Greetings, Empress Dowager." Yili put down the teacup and gave a faint smile. She was sitting leisurely in the chair to the left of the Empress. She didn't look like a heroine whose name shook the world, but rather like an elegant and quiet lady. The Empress Dowager knew that there was nothing she could say to Yili, so she gave a soft snort and said no more. After a while, the 10th prince walked out after tidying up his clothes. Following behind him was naturally his birth mother. The 10th prince's birth mother's surname was Li. After giving birth to the 10th prince, she was titled Noble Lady Li. Now, everyone in the palace called her imperial concubine Li. Perhaps it was because she had been lowly since she was young, but she suddenly became the noblest woman in the world. Li Shi's fear and uneasiness were no less than the 10th prince's, so she would often act in a panic and tremble like a frightened bird. This kind of pettiness naturally couldn't enter the Empress Dowager's eyes. Looking at the trembling mother and son in front of her, the Empress Dowager gave a displeased snort. Li Shi jumped in fright and fell to her knees on the ground. This servant greets Empress Dowager. Li Shi had only seen the Empress Dowager a few times before, and she had only kowtowed from a distance. The Empress Dowager's status was noble, so she naturally wasn't someone a low-ranking concubine like her could come into contact with. When she suddenly heard the Empress Dowager's cold snort, she unconsciously knelt down. The Empress frowned in displeasure, but she was also very helpless. Li Shi's cowardice couldn't be blamed on her, but the new emperor's birth mother being so unpresentable was really a headache. When the 10th prince saw his mother suddenly kneel, he was also frightened and wanted to kneel as well. A lily-white hand gently supported his arm. Even if it was a woman's hand, the strength was not something a 7-year-old child could contend against. The 10th prince naturally couldn't continue kneeling. He couldn't help but look in panic at the person holding him. Yi Li sat in the chair and looked with a smile at the frightened child in front of her. She smiled slightly and said, "A man has gold under his knees. As a man, you can't casually kneel." The child, who had tears in his eyes and wanted to cry, stared blankly at the woman with a gentle smile in front of him. For a moment, he forgot to cry. He only felt that the blue-clothed woman in front of him was very gentle and kind. She made him feel more comfortable and at ease than staying by his mother's side. It seemed that his frightened heart gradually calmed down and he couldn't help but quietly lean toward Yi Li. The Empress let out a sigh of relief. She looked at Li Shi and said, "Younger sister, what are you doing? Why aren't you getting up? Hurry up and help Nyang Li up." The palace maids serving around them quickly helped Li Shi up and sat down in a chair on the side. Li Shi looked uneasily at the Empress and Empress Dowager. Then she looked at Yi Li, who was smiling at her son. She helplessly twisted the corners of her gorgeous gold-embroidered clothes. At this time, the Empress Dowager's face had already sunk. She slammed the table and said sternly, "Princess Ding, what do you mean by this? Aijia is the 10th prince's grandmother. Could it be that Aijia can't accept this bow?" Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. She lowered her head and comforted the frightened 10th prince. The Empress calmly said, Mother, are you sure you want to accept this bow?" Although the 10th prince hadn't officially ascended the throne, from the moment the edict was issued, he was already the emperor of the Dechu state. As the emperor, even if it was his mother, he didn't need to bow. Moreover, was that bow just now? It was clearly the 10th prince and Li Shi kneeling because they were scared by the Empress Dowager. If he really knelt down, he would become a huge laughingstock. The Empress Dowager suppressed her anger and squeezed out a smile at the 10th prince, saying, "Su Yun, come here and let Imperial Grandmother take a look." The 10th prince had never seen an Imperial Grandmother. He only felt that the fierce old woman in front of him was very terrifying. He quickly hid behind Yi Li. The Empress Dowager's eyes darkened, but she didn't get angry. She took out a jade pendant and shook it, saying, "Come, let Imperial Grandmother take a look. This is Imperial Grandmother's gift to you." Chapter 604. The 10th prince looked hesitantly at the jade pendant and turned to look at the Empress. The Empress was drinking tea with her head lowered. But he looked at his Mufei, Li Shi, who was still wringing her clothes helplessly. How could she have the energy to care about him? In the end, he could only look at Yi Li. Yi Li laughed softly. "Do you like it? If you like it, then take it. Remember to thank Imperial Grandmother." "Grandson thanks Imperial Grandmother." The 10th prince took the jade pendant and said thank you to Imperial Grandmother before hiding behind Yi Li again. The Empress Dowager, who who had just put on a kind face and wanted to talk to him, grabbed empty air. Her face twisted again. The Empress saw this and controlled herself. Before the Empress Dowager got angry, she said lightly, "The 10th prince was frightened yesterday. If Imperial Mother is concerned about him, it is better to see him another day." The Empress Dowager had no choice but to leave angrily. Watching the Empress Dowager leave, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, "What happened to the Empress Dowager? Was she so frightened by the decree that she forgot to bring her brain out?" Seeing the Empress Dowager like this, Yili was really not used to it. In the past, even if the Empress Dowager was not unfathomable in her eyes, she still had some tricks up her sleeve. But to break into the Empress Palace like today and scare the new emperor who had not yet ascended the throne, it was simply a lowly trick. The Empress smiled and said, "The Empress Dowager was forced to lose her sense of propriety. After all, who would not panic when it comes to matters of life and death?" Yili frowned and said, "What about Li Wang? Does Li Wang really not care about the Empress Dowager?" The Empress shook her head and said, "I also don't understand the matter between mother and son. For example, she never understood whether the Empress Dowager loved her two sons or which son she loved more. And Li Wang and Mo Jingqi, the two brothers, Mo Jingqi, hated their own mother to the point of being unreasonable. This child is called Mo Su Yun." Yili looked down at the timid 10th prince hiding beside her and asked. "The name is not bad. In fact, Mo Jingqi's son's name was not suitable. The name of the founding Prince Ding was Mo Lanyun." Although no one stipulated that the royal family had to avoid mentioning the prince's name, such a name still made people feel a little uncomfortable. The Empress looked at the 10th prince, and a trace of affection flashed in her eyes. She said, "It was the people of the imperial astronomer who obtained it." Mo Jingqi had never taken this pair of mother and son seriously. Naturally, they couldn't expect him to personally come up with a name. Yili looked at the pitiful child in front of her with some amusement. This child's courage was a little too small. Of course, it could also be because he had been frightened these days. Although Xiaobao bullied Leng Junhan every day and called her Little Days Leng, Leng Junhan was more than 10 times smarter and bolder than the child in front of her. No wonder the Empress was so worried. As an emperor, it was no good to be bold and spoiled like Mo Ruiyun, but it was even more unacceptable to be scared to tears like the 10th prince, who might even sit on the throne. The former was barely able to keep up appearances, while the latter couldn't even keep up appearances. Looking at the 10th prince, the Empress sighed. Wearily, she said, "Great elder princess and the courtiers have handed him over to I, but how could I have the patience to change a child's temperament? This child has truly been taught to be too cowardly and timid." Yili smiled and said, "Princess Changle has been taught by your Imperial Highness to be intelligent and generous. Given time, the 10th prince will be better." The Empress smiled bitterly. How can there be time? He can't even deal with the present. If the 10th prince really insists on not attending the ascension ceremony, then even if the Prince of Li and the Lu family propose to appoint a new emperor, it won't be unreasonable. At that time. What the Empress didn't say was that, at that time, this child and Madame Li wouldn't be able to survive. Regardless of which side gained the upper hand in the end, they would absolutely not allow the most legitimate heir to the throne to live in this world. "Then, your Imperial Highness's meaning is?" Yili looked at the Empress and asked softly. She didn't believe that the Empress didn't know that this was her best chance to escape. The chaos in the Chu Palace and the foreseeable future was not a problem that could be completely resolved by supporting a new emperor. The Empress sighed and said, "Let's take it one step at a time." Yili shook her head and sighed. "Why bother, Your Imperial Highness? Could it be that Your Imperial Highness really doesn't want to see Wuyo again one day?" The Empress's expression dimmed. Hearing Yili's words, she was slightly distracted. The Empress lowered her head and pondered. Yili didn't disturb her. Smiling, she looked at the 10th prince and asked, "Little Imperial Highness, how old are you?" The 10th prince blinked his eyes. Looking at the gentle and amiable elder sister before him, he timidly replied, 7 years old. His soft, childlike voice caused Yi Li to sigh. Her Xiaobao's speech had been very smooth. From the beginning, his voice had been very crisp and clear. She had never heard such a soft, childlike voice. It was truly a pity that such an adorable child had been pushed to such a position in the imperial palace. Little Imperial Highness, have you been afraid these days? The 10th prince's small body trembled. His face revealed a frightened expression. Clearly, he thought of what had happened these days. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Looking at Yi Li and nodding, Yi Li sighed and hugged his small body. She said, don't be afraid. There are many people who will protect Little Imperial Highness, do you know? In the future, Little Imperial Highness will become the Emperor of the Dechu state. Do you know what an emperor is? The 10th prince raised his head and looked at Yi Li. He said, I know. It's someone like Imperial Father. Your Imperial Father is not worth emulating. However, you also saw that your Imperial Father is very powerful, right? Everyone is afraid of him. The 10th prince nodded. Yi Li continued to smile and said, so, Little Imperial Highness, you will become the new Emperor of the Dechu state. In the future, everyone will be afraid of you. So you don't need to be afraid of them. They won't dare to harm you. The 10th prince's voice carried a sobbing tone. But Wu-Wu, yesterday, Wu-Wu, Suyun was afraid. Yi Li hurriedly patted the 10th prince and softly coaxed him. Actually, she was not good at coaxing children. Mo Xiaobao did not need anyone to coax him. Leng Junhan, who was temporarily living in the Prince Ding mansion, was also a good child. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Little Imperial Highness, you have to be brave. A brave child doesn't need to be afraid of anything. Only then will others not dare to bully you, do you know? Perhaps Yi Li's comforting words were useful, or perhaps it was purely Yi Li's voice that made the child feel at ease. The 10th prince gradually stopped crying. He looked at Yi Li and said, Elder sister. Will elder sister accompany Suyun? Yi Li helplessly smiled bitterly. She could not accompany him. On the contrary, if this child really became an independent and outstanding prince in the future, they might even become enemies. However, looking at this soft and pitiful 7-year-old child in front of her, who could really harden her heart and ignore him? I didn't expect you to be so good at coaxing children. The Empress had already returned to her senses. She only felt that it was very interesting to see Yi Li and the 10th prince communicating, so she just watched from the side. Looking at Yi Li, the Empress smiled and said, speaking of which, this child is very timid. This is the first time he trusts someone he has just met so much. Even though I have seen him so many times, he usually just salutes properly. Yi Li smiled and said, it's probably because I have been taking care of children when I moved in, so I have more affinity with children. The Empress only thought that she was talking about Mo Xiaobao. She smiled and said, if this child has the courage and intelligence of little Shitzi, then I don't need to worry. Yi Li lowered her head and touched the head of the depressed child. The child, who was already 7 years old, was not really unable to understand anything. He could still understand the disappointment and worry in the adult's tone towards him. Yi Li said softly, this child is not stupid. It's not impossible for him to get better if he puts in more effort. But Yi Li looked at Madame Li, who was sitting aside in a daze, and frowned. It was not that she was heartless to disregard the relationship between mother and son, but Madame Li was really not suitable for educating children. Because she herself had a lot of things that she didn't understand and was powerless to do, she naturally couldn't not teach the child anything. All she could give the child was only doting. If the child was born in an ordinary family, it might not be a bad thing. At worst, the family would hand over a mediocre playboy or let Madame Li raise him. However, the 10th prince was born in the royal family and was in the teeth of the storm. A mother like Madame Li really couldn't give the child a suitable education. The Empress understood what she meant and nodded, saying, I see. I will discuss it with Great Elder Princess. Perhaps it's a good idea to invite Great Elder Princess to the palace to teach the 10th prince in person. After all, Great Elder Princess assisted 2 generations of former emperors and was known as the Iron Fist Princess. If it were another woman, she would naturally take this opportunity to raise the 10th prince in front of her. After all, although she was the empress, she was not the birth mother of the new emperor. In the future, when the new emperor took over the throne, his deep affection for his official mother and birth mother would determine his future life and honor. However, the empress didn't want to deprive the relationship between Madame Li and the 10th prince. She didn't have a son, but so what? It didn't mean that she would steal someone else's son. Just like her daughter, her Chang'e would always be her precious daughter. Your Majesty, you're right. Yi Li said with a smile. Yi Li was relieved that the empress didn't raise the 10th prince. Although the empress was unwilling to leave with Feng Zhiao now, no one could be sure that she wouldn't figure it out in the future. If she had already developed a relationship with the 10th prince by then, it would be difficult to deal with. At that time, Yi Li wouldn't be able to explain it to Feng Zhiao when she went back. Your Majesty. Madame Li said uneasily. Although she was stupid, she still understood that the empress was dissatisfied with her. In the palace, the only person she could rely on was her son. In any case, she didn't want to be separated from her son. The empress said indifferently, Don't worry. I just invite Great Elder Princess to the palace to teach the 10th prince. I won't separate you and your son. Thank you, Your Majesty. Hearing this, Madame Li breathed a sigh of relief and said happily. Chapter 605. In the Prince Ding mansion, he heard the words that Yi Li brought back. Feng Zhiao was silent for a long time, but he could not say anything. In this regard, Yi Li was powerless to help. From Feng Zhiao's point of view, she could blame the empress' stubbornness for delaying Feng Zhiao. But this could not be blamed on the empress. She had never given Feng Zhiao any hope. What she was doing now was indeed the best that any woman in this era could do. Moreover, it was the best that an empress could do. Yi Li could not use her own standards to ask a woman who had been educated to be loyal to the monarch. Xiuyao, Feng San. Yi Li asked worriedly. Mo Xiuyao raised his head from the book in his hand, saying, Don't worry about him, he knows his limits. Seeing Mo Xiuyao like this, Yi Li shook her head and threw this matter to the back of her mind. She told Mo Xiuyao about seeing the 10th prince in the palace, and finally sighed, That child is too worried and timid. I don't know what Mo Jingqi was thinking when he left behind the edict. Mo Xiuyao put down the book and walked behind Yi Li. He hugged her from behind, letting her lean on him, and said softly, This is between Mo Jingli and other people, it has nothing to do with us. Li, why do you need to copy hearts for them? Yi Li smiled and shook her head, saying, I'm not copying hearts for them, it's just that. It was just that looking at the ignorant child who was destined to be sacrificed, she could not bear it. That child was only a little older than Mo Xiaobao. Maybe it was because she was a mother, her heart was softer than before. Mo Xiuyao said softly, although the capital is under martial law right now. No one dares to stop the people of the Prince Ding mansion. If Li feels bored, you can walk around, you don't have to worry about the trivial matters in the palace. Yi Li nodded and said, I understand. Understanding that Mo Xiuyao didn't want her to worry about those trivial matters, Yi Li naturally agreed. They were a family. As for the others, no matter how pitiful they were still outsiders. She didn't want Mo Xiuyao to worry about her. Mother. Mother. Mo Xiaobao's voice passed through the long corridor, cheerfully rushing over. Mo Xiuyao frowned unhappily, looking up at Mo Xiaobao who had already run to the door and was about to enter. Behind Mo Xiaobao was Ling Junhan, who was panting. Yi Li said helplessly, Chen, walk slowly. Look at how tired Junhan is. Mo Xiaobao looked back at Yi Li, who was still panting but smiling at him. He snorted softly and snuggled into Yi Li's arms. Yi Li looked down at his annoyed little face and couldn't help chuckling. She patted Mo Xiaobao and said, Junhan is younger than you. You are the older brother, so you have to take care of her. Do you understand? I understand. Mo Xiaobao whispered. She looked up at Leng Junhan and said, Little dummy Leng, if you can't walk, just tell me. I will wait for you. Leng Junhan touched her little head and grinned innocently at Mo Xiaobao. It made Mo Xiaobao more embarrassed. Yi Li had enough of her son's embarrassed appearance. She waved to Leng Junhan with a smile and said, Junhan, come to aunt. Leng Junhan cheered and threw herself in front of Yi Li. He smiled happily and rubbed against Yi Li's arms. He also liked brother Xiaobao's mother very much. She smelled good, was warm, and as good as his mother. Unfortunately, brother Xiaobao didn't like him pestering aunt. Mo Xiaoyao stood behind Yi Li with a dark face. It was fine if it was only Mo Xiaobao, but now there were two brats hogging Yi Li. The time he spent alone with Yi Li every day was shortened by a lot. Thinking of this, Mo Xiaoyao began to regret his decision to send Leng Haoyu. Mo Xiaoyao began to regret his decision to send Leng Haoyu. Mo Xiaoyao said that Feng Zhiyao had a sense of propriety, but he didn't expect that Feng Zhiyao would get into big trouble that day. Late at night, it was already late at night. The entire Prince Ding mansion had already quieted down. Only the candlelight in the study was still lit. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li sat in the study, reading files and chatting from time to time. Although they seemed to be leisurely in the capital, there were still countless things that they needed to personally check every day. Even if they didn't need to make decisions immediately, they still needed to grasp the information to prevent any sudden changes. Feng San still hasn't come back from going out today. After reading the last file, Yi Li saw that there was still a large pile of files in front of Mo Xiaoyao. She casually picked one up and flipped through it as she asked. Mo Xiaoyao said, he probably went out to find a place to vent his anger. Feng Zhiyao looked casual and elegant, as if he was born with a good temper, but in reality, his personality was very clear. His happiness and anger were all displayed on his face. It was just that these years of experience had taught him to hide his emotions in front of others. Yi Li frowned slightly and said, I keep feeling that Feng San's mood wasn't right when he left during the day. He's waited for so many years. It would be strange if his mood was right. In reality, Mo Xiaoyao had never been optimistic about Feng Zhiyao's feelings for the Empress. When they were young, he had vaguely tried to persuade him a few times. But every time, it would end with the two of them punching and kicking each other until the sky turned dark. As they grew older, they learned to respect each other's feelings. It was not easy to persuade them. So it dragged on for so many years until Feng Zhiyao was already in his 30s. According to the age of an ordinary rich young master in this world, Feng San would be holding a grandson in 2 years. These two. Yi Li sighed. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly stood up from her chair. Someone broke in. Mo Xiaoyao beside her had already rushed out of the study like a wisp of smoke, leaving only his low voice, Yi Li, go watch those two brats. Yi Li looked regretfully at the white figure that disappeared outside the door. This was the difference between a perfect qinggong and an ordinary one. When Yi Li arrived at the courtyard where Mo Xiaobao and Leng Junhan lived, Zhuo Jing was already waiting outside the door. When he saw Yi Li, he bowed and greeted, Wang Fei. Yi Li nodded, it's been hard on you. Are the two children all right? Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, this is this subordinate's duty. Little heir and young master Leng are fine. As he spoke, Mo Xiaobao rushed out from inside, Mother, what happened? Yi Li saw a certain someone's sparkling eyes filled with eagerness. She raised her hand and patted his head lightly, be good and stay with Zhuo Jing. Take good care of Junhan. Mother will go to your Fuwang to take a look. Mo Xiaobao pouted in disappointment at not being able to join in the fun. But he still nodded obediently. Then mother, be careful. Yi Li smiled, you're so mischievous. After settling the two children, Yi Li rushed to the front courtyard. But she found that there was no fight. It was obvious that the person who broke into the Fu was someone they knew. Shaking her head, Yi Li turned around and walked towards the parlor in the front yard. However, what she saw in front of her made her head ache. In the reception pavilion, Feng Zhiyao was sitting on the ground. There was a pool of dark red blood beside him. The blood had not dried yet. It was obvious that someone had just vomited. Mo Xiaoyao stood in the middle of the hall with his hands clasped behind his back. The expression on his face was chilling. Yi Li did not doubt that it was Mo Xiaoyao's masterpiece that Feng Zhiyao was sitting on the ground and vomiting blood. But what gave her a headache was not only that. In the chair next to him, there was a person wrapped under a large black screen. Although the face could not be seen clearly, Yi Li could tell that it was a woman based on the body shape. What kind of person could a woman be that Feng Zhiyao would bring back in the middle of the night? Yi Li thought about it and felt her head hurt even more. Chapter 606. The woman in the chair was clearly still unconscious. Yi Li walked over and pulled back the cloak covering her face, revealing the woman's beautiful and dignified face. Who else could it be other than the empress she had just met today? Nonsense. Yi Li turned to glare at Feng Zhiyao as she scolded in a low voice. Feng Zhiyao didn't mind and hooked his lips into a smile. His normally teasing eyes were now filled with deep helplessness and sadness. Even Yi Li couldn't bear to say anything more. With a sigh, Yi Li asked, did she agree to you bringing her out like this? Feng Zhiyao was silent. Yi Li understood that he had ignored the empress' wishes and directly brought her out of the palace. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao become even angrier, Yi Li silently walked to his side and pulled his hand to the side to sit down. Otherwise, Yi Li couldn't guarantee that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't give Feng Zhiyao another slap. You've become quite daring. I never knew that young Master Feng was so daring. Sitting next to Yi Li, Mo Xiaoyao suppressed his anger and coldly said to Feng Zhiyao. Feng Zhiyao faintly smiled, but he didn't have his usual carefree and unrestrained air. Only a faint helplessness and dullness remained. I'll take responsibility for what I've done. I won't implicate the Prince Ding mansion. Bang! Mo Xiaoyao slapped the table next to him. The table was fine, but the furnishings and teacups on the table instantly shattered. Mo Xiaoyao was so angry that he laughed. Good. Very good. Young Master Feng, you're so capable, but won't you implicate the Prince Ding mansion? Since you're so capable, why don't you just take her out of the capital? Feng Zhiyao was silent. The city gates were currently closed and the capital was currently under martial law. It was fine if he was alone, but it was impossible for him to bring an unconscious person out of the city. Feng Zhiyao closed his eyes tiredly. Xiaoyao, I'm sorry. But I don't regret it. Mo Xiaoyao snorted. Looking at him, he said indifferently, young Master Feng San thinks you're smart. Didn't you think of a way out before you started? Did you enter the palace to kidnap people in a moment of impulsiveness? Feng Zhiyao was a little embarrassed. He really didn't think too much about it. After he had snuck into the palace to find the empress, he had been rejected by the empress. The more he thought about it, the sadder he felt. In a moment of anger, he didn't think about anything and returned to the palace to rescue her. But he didn't think that Mo Xiaoyao would be so angry, not because he went into the palace to kidnap the empress, but because he didn't even have a plan before he kidnapped her. Then, what should we do now? Understanding Mo Xiaoyao's thoughts, Feng Zhiyao didn't force it. In terms of intelligence, he lost to Mo Xiaoyao by a lot. He could accept this fact. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said with a slight smile, how about we send her back before anyone finds out? No. Feng Zhiyao quickly said. He had taken her out with great difficulty. If he sent her back, he couldn't guarantee that he would have the courage to do so next time. And he didn't bring her out just because of his feelings. It was more because he knew that her future in the palace wouldn't be easy. Even if she wasn't willing to accept him, he hoped that she could at least live a more relaxed and happy life. At least, he still had some hope, right? Mo Xiaoyao looked at the sky. It was already 5 o'clock. He shook his head. It's too late. In at most an hour, someone will find that the Empress is missing. Yili frowned. Then what should we do? Send her out of the city now. Right now, the sky wasn't bright yet. It wasn't a good time to leave the city. But if they missed this last moment. Once people found out that the Empress was missing, it would be even harder to leave the capital. She can't leave right now. We all know the Empress' personality. She isn't someone that just leaves. If we send her out now, she will come back on her own. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. Let's temporarily stay in the Prince Ding mansion. Even if the Empress is missing, no one will dare to search the Prince Ding mansion. Fortunately, the guards and servants of the Prince Ding mansion were all trustworthy and Feng Zhiyao had come back at night. Otherwise, tonight's matter would be like how Mo Jingli had kicked his son to death. Before the sky even brightened, the news would have spread to all the mansions in the capital. Many thanks to Prince, many thanks to Wang Fei, Feng Zhiyao said joyfully. Yili waved her hand and said, it's fine. Find a place to settle her down. You've been busy all day. Take advantage of the time to rest. Feng Zhiyao gave his thanks again. He picked up the sleeping Empress and turned to leave. In the flower pavilion, Yili turned to look at Mo Xiaoyao and said with a raised eyebrow, this is the propriety that Prince spoke of? He even dared to kidnap the Empress of a country. If this was propriety, then what was there that he did not know propriety? Mo Xiaoyao smiled helplessly. This is probably the first time in Feng San's life that he did not know propriety. Allowing Feng Zhiyao to settle the Empress, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao did not go to visit. The two held hands as they returned to their own courtyard to rest. Less than 2 hours later, someone came to their door. Prince, Wang Fei, Duke Hua requests an audience. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao exchanged a look. Mo Xiaoyao stood and said, invite Duke Hua to the study. I will go over now. Yi Li reached out to grab Mo Xiaoyao and said with a faint smile, let's go together. Mo Xiaoyao did not object. The two changed their clothes and went to the study. Duke Hua, who had been invited to the study, was discontented. His old face with white hair and beard was much more haggard. His slightly muddy old eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. Seeing Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao walk in hand, he hurriedly stood to greet them, Prince, Wang Fei. Mo Xiaoyao raised a hand to support Duke Hua. He said in a rare gentle voice, Duke, why are you here so early? Is something the matter? Duke Hua sighed and said with a bitter smile, isn't something big happening? Otherwise, why would this old man be so insensible as to come here so early in the morning? The two of them helped Duke Hua sit down on either side before taking their own seats. Yi Li smiled faintly, Old Duke, what are you saying? We'll always welcome you whenever you come to visit us. You haven't said what happened yet. What happened? Duke Hua was not in the mood to be courteous. He said in a low voice, the Empress is missing. Although they already knew that Duke Hua would come here for this matter, they still didn't know how to say it. After a while, Yi Li slowly opened her mouth and said, Old Duke. Her Majesty the Empress is in Ding Wang Fu. Chapter 607. Hearing Yi Li's words, Duke Hua was stunned at first. He clearly didn't know how to react. Mo Xiaoyao didn't say anything either. He held his teacup and calmly waited for Duke Hua's reaction. After a long time, Duke Hua finally came back to his senses. He looked at the two calm people in front of him and said, What's going on? Prince, you. Mo Xiaoyao put down his teacup and looked at Du Hua apologetically. This happened so suddenly that I didn't inform you. I'm really sorry. Du Hua finally reacted after a long time. He sighed and glared at Mo Xiaoyao unhappily. Who wants you to apologize? I just want to ask why you brought the Empress to the Prince Ding mansion for no reason. Does the prince think that there aren't enough people watching the Prince Ding mansion? Hearing this, Yili smiled faintly. I'm sorry for making you worry. It's true that we're young and inexperienced. We were impulsive. Du Hua sighed and looked at Yili. The prince and the princess aren't impulsive people. I won't ask why. Ask the Empress to come out. I'll try to send her back to the palace. Yili and Mo Xiaoyao looked at each other. They didn't expect Du Hua to let them take the Empress away with just a few words. However, since Feng Zhiyao had taken the risk to bring the Empress out, they couldn't let Du Hua take the Empress away before they could be sure that Feng Zhiyao couldn't persuade the Empress. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Du Hua and calmly said, That's why I said sorry to you, Du Hua. I'm afraid I can't let you take the Empress back for now. Why is that? Du Hua frowned and asked. The Empress being taken out of the palace by the Prince Ding mansion was really out of his expectations. The reason why he hurried to the Prince Ding mansion was because he wanted to use the Prince Ding mansion's power to investigate this matter. But he didn't expect such an outcome. Regardless of whether it was for his personal relationship with the Prince Ding mansion or for the relationship between the Dechu state and the Northwest, this matter could not be spread. Therefore, this decision could be said to be the best decision for everyone. He did not understand why Prince Ding and Wang Fei would object. Yili sighed helplessly. It seemed like Du Hua didn't know about Feng Zhiyao. As a result, none of them knew what Du Hua's reaction would be if he heard that it was Feng Zhiyao who took the initiative to kidnap the person. After thinking about it, Yili was about to say something when the Empress's voice came from the door. I've made father worry. I'll go back with you now. The three of them turned their heads to look outside the door. The Empress, who had taken off her large cloak, appeared at the door in her bright yellow phoenix robe. The expression on his face was indifferent, and no one could tell what he was thinking. The Empress stepped into the hall, and Feng Zhiyao followed her in. The man in red had bloodshot eyes, and his expression was tired and gloomy. He looked even worse than when he had been hit by Mo Xiaoyao last night. Feng-san, what's wrong? You look so bad. Didn't you see a doctor last night? Yili asked faintly. Du Hua's expression changed when he saw Feng Zhiyao behind the Empress. However, when he saw that Yili and Mo Xiaoyao were both present, he didn't say anything. Instead, his hand on the armrest slowly tightened. Yili glanced at Du Hua out of the corner of her eye, and then asked Feng Zhiyao with a smile. Hearing this, the Empress turned to look at Feng Zhiyao in surprise. She had noticed before that Du Hua's expression was not good, but the two of them were not on good terms, so she didn't ask too much. She just assumed that he didn't rest well last night. Now that she took a closer look, she found that not only did Feng Zhiyao's expression look wrong, but his face was also tired and pale. I'm fine. Thank you, Princess, for your concern. Feng Zhiyao said hoarsely. Yili frowned. Xiaoyao didn't go easy on you. You should have a doctor take a look at you later, in case it leaves a lasting illness. Feng Zhiyao silently lowered his head, neither refusing nor agreeing. When Yili said this, the two people present naturally understood what was going on. The Empress's face paled, and Du Hua's expression turned even uglier. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand. Let's sit down and talk. Sister Hua, even if you want to return to the palace, there's no need to rush. The word Sister Hua made the Empress's eyes turn red. In fact, after she married Mo Xiaoyao stopped calling her Sister Hua. This seemingly ordinary form of address made her involuntarily recall the carefree time when she was still a budding young girl. Du Hua looked at everyone present for a long time, then sighed deeply and waved his hand. Forget it. It's already like this. It won't be bad even if it's a little later. The Empress and Feng Zhiyao finally sat down, one on the left and one on the right. Feng Zhiyao sat opposite Du Hua, but his eyes were fixed on the Empress as if the people around him didn't exist. Seeing this, Du Hua frowned but didn't say anything in the end. Old Duke, do you really want to send the Empress back to the palace? Mo Xiaoyao looked at Du Hua and asked calmly. Old Duke, you should know that the news of the Empress's disappearance has spread throughout the palace. Even if you send her back without leaving a trace, in the future, if the new emperor or someone else wants to make trouble for the Empress, this will definitely be used against her. Du Hua glared at Feng Zhiyao with some anger. He was also an old man who had experienced countless things. Seeing the situation in front of him, how could he not know what was going on? Looking sideways at his calm daughter sitting beside him, Du Hua sighed helplessly. So what if she doesn't go back? If it's possible, our Hua family won't be willing. This old man understands Prince's meaning, but the Empress's identity is different from others. If it's discovered that the Empress is in the northwest, it will be a great blow to the Prince and the Prince Ding Mansion's reputation. Back then, how could Du Hua be willing to marry his daughter to Mo Jingqi, who was still a prince? The Hua family's wealth had reached its peak. As long as he was still alive, no matter who ascended the throne, they would leave some face for the Hua family. A prince's wife or even the Empress was never a good thing for the Hua family. Unfortunately, the late emperor was worried that the Hua family and the Prince Ding Mansion were too close, so he forcefully tied the Hua family to the ship of Mo Jingqi, who was about to succeed the throne. If the emperor wanted his subjects to die, they had no choice but to die, let alone a mere arranged marriage. Du Hua had always known of Feng Zhiyao's existence. However, he had never placed too much importance on Feng Zhiyao. It wasn't that he looked down on Feng Zhiyao, but Feng Zhiyao was, after all, several years younger than the Empress. When the Empress was married, Feng Zhiyao was still a half-grown child. Even if there was something going on, Du Hua only treated it as a child's momentary infatuation. Thus, when Feng Zhiyao sneaked into Du Hua's mansion on the night before the Empress's wedding, not only did he not make a move to capture him, he even allowed him to smoothly meet him. Otherwise, given that Feng Zhiyao was only 15 years old, how could it be so easy for him to break into the heavily guarded Du Hua's mansion? Du Hua naturally wouldn't say these things. He sized up the red-clothed man in front of him. Feng Zhiyao, who was already in his 30s, was no longer the thin youth who had left in the heavy rain. His handsome face now had a hint of calmness and elegance that hadn't been there in his youth. More importantly, Feng Zhiyao, who was the same age as Mo Xiaoyao, didn't even have a concubine, let alone a wife. Du Hua naturally knew why this was. No matter how one looked at it, Feng Zhiyao was undoubtedly the most satisfactory son-in-law candidate. It was just a pity. Sizing up the somewhat thin and haggard man who still couldn't hide his handsomeness, Du Hua's eyes gradually turned into pity and helplessness. Chapter 608. Yili smiled faintly and said softly, "Old Duke, does the Hua family intend to support the new emperor?" Du Hua was stunned. He did not expect Yili to ask such a question so directly. However, seeing Mo Xiaoyao calmly drinking his tea without being offended, based on his understanding of King Ding's Fu and Mo Xiaoyao, he shook his head and said bluntly, "I'm afraid that Du Hua's Fu has the heart but is powerless." Although the younger generation of the Hua family was not a good-for-nothing, they did not have any outstanding talents. When he was still alive, he could help a little. But he was already over 80 years old. Who knew how many more days he could hold on? Once he passed away, not only would the Hua family, who supported the new emperor, be destroyed, but the new emperor they supported would also be unlucky. If so, after the new emperor ascends the throne, what will the queen do? What will the empress do? Yili asked. Du Hua frowned. The queen was Mo Jingqi's wife. No matter which prince ascended the throne, they would have to respect her as the Empress Dowager. But Du Qua also understood that although the 10th prince's birth mother was weak and useless, he was not afraid that the queen could not suppress her. But women in the palace were the most fickle. And if the 10th prince successfully took over the throne, the Hua family, who had been watching on the sidelines, would not have a good time. By then, the queen's life would not be easy. If something happened to the 10th prince, as the official mother, the queen would not have a good time either. Du Qua looked at the queen hesitantly. All these years, he had always felt guilty towards this daughter of his. She joined the royal family for the Hua family. But at the same time, because of the Hua family, she could only maintain her appearance in the palace. She could never win her husband's heart and could not even have a son. The Hua family always knew that it was not that the queen could not give birth to a son, but Mo Jingqi was not willing to let the queen give birth to a son. "Father, you don't have to be like this. Your daughter has lived a glorious life. There is nothing wrong with it." Looking at the old man's guilty eyes, the queen smiled faintly. Tilting her head to look at Yi Li, who was sitting next to Mo Xiuyao, the empress smiled and said, "I know that Wang Fei is thinking for me, but some things are meant to be and cannot be forced." Yi Li frowned. Doesn't the empress want to see Chang'e again? Chang'e? Du Qua's eyes widened. Chang'e is in the northwest. Although Du Qua's mansion had sent people to protect his granddaughter, they did not return to Du Qua's mansion for safety reasons. Therefore, Du Qua only guessed that Chang'e had gone missing because she had been rescued and hidden by the people he had sent. He did not expect her to be in the northwest. Yi Li said with a smile, "Of course. Chang'e is a girl after all. How can I rest assured that she will be alone outside?" Du Qua looked at the empress, then at Feng Zhiyao, Mo Xiuyao, and Yi Li. His snow-white brows were tightly furrowed. Before he could say anything, Zhuo Jing came in and reported, "Prince, Wang Fei, someone from Du Qua's mansion is here. The Prince Regent wants to see the old Duke." Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and looked displeased. Mo Jingli is getting more and more arrogant. Du Qua was not angry. He stood up and said, "Forget it. He was the Prince Regent personally appointed by the late Emperor. There is nothing wrong with summoning me. Sorry for disturbing Prince Wang Fei. I will take my leave now." With that, he walked out of the door. The Empress also stood up and followed Du Qua out. Seeing this, Feng Zhiyao wanted to stand up. However, he felt an invisible pressure on his face, making him unable to move. He could only watch as the Empress stood up and left. Du Qua, who had walked to the door, suddenly turned around and looked at the Empress, saying, "Stay in Prince Ding Mansion for a few days. I am not ready to send you back to the palace." "Father." The Empress frowned and said worriedly. Du Qua did not give her a chance to refute, and said firmly, "That's it. You don't have to send me back." "Father, I..." Seeing Du Qua leave, the Empress wanted to follow, but she heard a pth behind her. Feng Zhiyao spat out a mouthful of blood. "Ah Yao." The Empress was shocked. Feng Zhiyao smiled at her with difficulty, but the blood on his lips kept falling. Countless dark red flowers bloomed on his originally red brocade clothes. The Empress quickly went forward to support him. She glanced at Mo Xiuyao and said, "What happened? How did he get hurt so badly?" Mo Xiuyao did not care. He calmly drank his tea and said, "I didn't hit him hard last night. He didn't want to live anymore, right?" Last night, Mo Xiuyao did not hit him hard, so he added a bit of hidden energy. It was enough to force Feng Zhiyao to spit out blood, but not to the point of hurting him. "You." The Empress frowned and glared at Feng Zhiyao with slight anger. Yi Li quickly said, "Empress, please help Feng San back to his room to rest. I'll have someone call a doctor over." Seeing Feng Zhiyao's face turn even paler after spitting out blood and his body on the verge of collapse, the Empress did not care about anything else. She could only help Feng Zhiyao out, completely forgetting that they could call someone to help. Seeing the Empress help Feng Zhiyao out with some difficulty, Yili asked her husband in confusion, "These two, can they do it or not?" Mo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow and said, "How would I know this? Du Hua, I sent him away and kept the doctor for him. If Feng San still can't do anything, then let him die by himself. I am not his father. I don't have to think for him." Yili angrily pinched him and sighed, "These two." She shook her head and did not know what to say. In fact, she somewhat understood the Empress's thoughts. Other than the responsibility of being the Empress, the women of this era were still bound by the idea of not having a second husband. Perhaps it was not difficult for her to give up the position of Empress, but it would be more difficult for her to accept Feng Zhiyao. Mo Xiaoyao took her into his arms with a smile and said softly, "Don't worry. At least Feng Zhiyao should be able to persuade her to go to the northwest this time. After all, Chang'e is still in the northwest." Once the responsibility of being the Empress was removed, Chang'e was definitely the most important person to the Empress. As long as the Empress still wanted to see her daughter, there was no need to worry that she would not leave. But how to make her accept Feng San really had nothing to do with him. He was the prince, not the Yulao. Yili thought that Mo Xiaoyao's words made sense. Even if they were thinking for the Empress, they should not interfere too much with her feelings. It was the Empress's freedom to accept whoever she wanted. It could not be said that because Feng Zhiyao had done the most for her, the Empress should accept Feng Zhiyao as a matter of course. And now it was much better than they had expected. At least Du Hua did not seem to want to take the Empress back to the palace. As long as Du Hua did not object, the Empress would have less resistance to leaving the capital. "Didn't you hit him too hard just now?" Yili thought of the blood that Feng Zhiyao spat out. It was real blood. It was not an act to deceive the Empress. Mo Xiaoyao said carelessly, "Feng San has been depressed these days. He was seriously injured last night. It was a good thing that he spat out the blood. Don't worry about it." "Really?" Yili was a bit doubtful. Was it really not because Feng Zhiyao caused so much trouble and Mo Xiaoyao took the opportunity to take revenge? Deep in the prince's mansion, in the courtyard covered by green trees, the Empress had already changed out of her gorgeous phoenix robe. The inconspicuous white robe made her look less noble and more beautiful. She also looked much younger. After sending away the doctor that had examined Feng Zhiyao, the Empress held the prescription that the doctor had left behind. Her brows were tightly knit. She thought of how the doctor had said that Feng Zhiyao had been depressed for a long time and was afraid that it would harm his life. Turning back to look at the pale-faced man lying on the bed with a heavy shadow under his eyes, the Empress' heart suddenly ached. In the end, she could only sigh and turn to find someone to boil the medicine. "Don't go." His clothes were pulled. Feng Zhiyao's voice was clearly weak. His eyes looking at the Empress were filled with hope, sadness, and caution. The Empress helplessly stood there for a while before finally giving in. She walked to the stool by the bed and sat down. Looking at him, she said, "Yao, rest well for a while. I won't go. When you fall asleep, I'll have someone boil the medicine." Feng Zhiyao was dissatisfied, "I can't go even if I'm asleep." The Empress was in a difficult position. She needed to find someone to boil the medicine. She didn't know if Yili did it on purpose or if there were really too few people in the Prince Ding mansion. There wasn't a single servant in Feng Zhiyao's courtyard. If she wanted to do something, she could only go personally or go outside the courtyard to find someone. Feng Zhiyao stubbornly stared at the Empress' face. He looked like he wouldn't close his eyes if she didn't agree. Seeing the Empress' worried frown, Feng Zhiyao said in a low voice, "I'm fine, the injury isn't serious. I don't need to take medicine." In reality, his injury really wasn't serious. After spitting out that mouthful of blood, his heart that had been heavy had relaxed a lot. But it really was very painful. Feng Zhiyao didn't need to think to know that he had been tricked by Mo Xiuyao in secret. But to be able to have this warm interaction, even if Mo Xiuyao had seriously injured him, he would only be grateful to him. Nonsense, why aren't you taking medicine? Do you think you're still a child? The Empress reprimanded softly. Feng Zhiyao smiled. He thought of when he was young. He was often beaten by Mo Xiuyao until he was covered in wounds but refused to apply medicine. The woman in front of him had also reprimanded him like this. Wait a while. You can't sneak away while I'm asleep. All right, rest well, the Empress said softly. The Empress said softly. She seemed to see the handsome and stubborn boy from more than 10 years ago. The Empress's expression softened a lot. Having received the promise, Feng Zhiyao finally closed his eyes in satisfaction. Chapter 609. The Empress had disappeared from the palace. This was definitely a huge matter that could shake the entire court. Although she didn't know why, Mo Jingli had sealed this news within a certain range. However, this did not stop the people who knew the news from secretly discussing it. Therefore, when Duke Hua received the news and rushed into the palace, the people who met him along the way could not help but look at this old general with sympathy. When the previous regent Mo Lufang was still alive, and even when Duke Hua was still young, the Hua family was extremely prestigious. Although the Prince Ding mansion was not the #1 family in Dechu State, it was definitely one of the top families. However, ever since Mo Lufang passed away and Duke Hua became old, anyone with eyes could see that the Hua family was gradually being suppressed by the emperor. Even with the empress daughter, this situation did not improve. Now, the empress who was about to become the empress dowager had disappeared. How could people not feel sympathy? When Duke Hua arrived, Mo Jingli was in the side hall of the empress palace. After receiving the news of the empress' disappearance, he quickly rushed to the palace to confirm the news. After all, after the 10th prince ascended the throne, the empress and the Hua family would have the easiest time taking the initiative. When that time came, it would be very disadvantageous for them. If the empress really disappeared, the Hua family naturally would not have any excuse to participate in court politics. Duke Hua was already old, and the remaining members of the Hua family did not have the qualifications. This old official greets the regent. Duke Hua trembled as he bowed. Mo Jingli quickly went up and personally helped Duke Hua up. I am very ashamed to have the old duke personally come to the palace. I hope the old duke will not blame me. Tears immediately flowed down Duke Hua's old face. Prince is too serious. How could this old man not come when the empress suddenly disappeared? The poor empress. The Forbidden Palace is so strict, how could the empress? Mo Jingli's expression froze. He always knew that this old Duke Hua was not easy to deal with. In just a few sentences, he had already pushed the blame to him. Now that the guards of the capital and the palace were in his hands, it was fine if Duke Hua wanted to say that he was at a disadvantage. People might even suspect that he had done something to harm the empress. Old Duke, don't be impatient. I believe that imperial sister-in-law is blessed by the heavens and will definitely be able to turn her misfortune into a blessing. Old Duke, please sit down and talk. Even if he wished that the empress would never return, Mo Jingli had to say a few words on the surface. However, this kind of consolation was obviously useless to Duke Hua. Duke Hua was still choking with sobs as he muttered about the empress. The white-haired old man's face was covered in tears, and it was a pitiful sight. At this time, there were many people in the hall. Not only the high-ranking concubines in the Empress Dowager's palace, but even the prince of the imperial family had come. Looking at Duke Hua's miserable state, the others did not have the heart to ask any more questions. However, the Empress Dowager did not have such scruples. She raised her voice and said, I heard that Duke Hua just came out of the Prince Ding mansion. I wonder what you're doing at the Prince Ding mansion at this time. Everyone present looked at the Empress Dowager in surprise. It was as if the Empress Dowager had changed into a different person after the announcement of the edict. If the Empress Dowager originally had the demeanor of a scheming heroine, the Empress Dowager now looked more like an ordinary ignorant woman. Noble Consort Lu, who was sitting next to the Empress Dowager, had a faint smile on her lips. Compared to the Empress Dowager, she clearly had more advantages. Therefore, after the initial panic and shock, she quickly calmed down. She knew what to do to keep herself alive. Duke Hua looked at the Empress Dowager with a sorrowful expression and said sadly, "Empress Dowager, please forgive me." This old official heard that the Empress had gone missing. In a moment of desperation, I went to the Prince Ding mansion to ask for help from Prince Ding. This old official did not consider it thoroughly. "Please punish me, Empress Dowager." Everyone was embarrassed. "You've already said so, who could blame you?" Moreover, before Mo Xiaoyao passed away, he had restored all the status and reputation of the Prince Ding mansion. Although Mo Xiaoyao was unwilling to accept it, as the officials of Dechu State, they could not pretend that they did not see it. With the status of the Prince Ding mansion, it was not impossible for Duke Hua to ask for help immediately when the Empress went missing. Mo Jingli frowned slightly. He looked at Duke Hua with a rare amiable expression and said, "Old Duke, you worry too much. Old Duke, you did not do anything biased in this matter. What crime have you committed?" "But I don't know what Prince Ding has to say." The Empress Dowager, who had been refuted by Mo Jingli, had a twisted expression but did not say anything more. Duke Hua sighed and said, "It happened so suddenly. Prince Ding just received the news and has already sent people to investigate. I think there will be news soon." Everyone saw Duke Hua's anxious and worried expression and did not ask anything more. Only Mo Jingli and a few relatives of the imperial family comforted him. After so many years, the Empress had done things properly. She still had some reputation in the imperial family. Duke Hua only thanked them one by one and did not say anything else. "Old Duke, please wait." At the palace entrance, Duke Hua was about to leave the palace and return to his residence when he was stopped by someone behind him. Turning around, Duke Hua looked at the unfamiliar palace maid in front of him and said calmly, "What is it?" The palace maid looked to be about 14 or 15 years old. Facing Duke Hua, who had spent his entire life fighting, she still had some status. She lowered her head and hurriedly said, "The imperial consort invites old Duke for a chat." Duke Hua coldly said, "My Hua family has no relationship with the imperial consort. Presumably, there is nothing to chat about. Moreover, these are troubled times. It is inconvenient for this old man to rashly enter the harem." The palace maids saw that he was about to leave and hurriedly said, "Old Duke, please wait." The imperial consort said, "It is about the Empress. Old Duke Hua, please go." Duke Hua's face darkened. He coldly glanced at the palace maid and said with his hands behind his back, "Young lady, please lead the way." Finally, she completed the imperial consort's order. The palace maid secretly let out a sigh of relief. She hurriedly turned around and led Duke Hua to see imperial consort Lu. The palace maid did not lead Duke Hua to the palace where imperial consort Lu lived. Instead, she led him to an inconspicuous and remote palace in the imperial palace. They did not meet anyone along the way. Duke Hua knew that imperial consort Lu was completely different from the Empress Dowager. Even now, imperial consort Lu still had deep connections and power in the imperial palace. In this case, Duke Hua's heart sank. If imperial consort Lu really knew the truth about the Empress' disappearance, greetings, imperial consort. Imperial consort Lu sat under the eaves of the palace that had been deserted for a long time. She still looked high and mighty, like a fairy in the sky. Duke Hua had never liked imperial consort Lu. It was not because she was his daughter's rival in love. It was because when imperial consort Lu was still a young girl, she had a kind of indifference that came from her bones. It was as if no one in the world was worthy of her attention. He didn't know where Imperial Consort Lu got her arrogance from. She thought she was above all the other beauties in the world. However, that kind of arrogance made most people feel very uncomfortable. Therefore, Duke Hua had also noticed Imperial Consort Lu's feelings for Mo Xiuyao. However, he had never thought highly of her. Prince Ding was a proud and arrogant young man. How could he take a fancy to such an arrogant woman, no matter how beautiful she was? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.